Chapter 191 Stop meddling into the matters of elders. Blood. Blood again. Thales shakily extended his right hand and touched his sticky face. Staring at the blood on his palm, which was becoming icy cold, he felt that his breaths were not his anymore. Shield District is filled with their people, despicable Northlanders. Ida's voice rang. It sounded like it was coming from somewhere far away. Listen up, kid, even though the calamity was there, Putre dispatched all your subordinates to search for you, that cocky brat from the Casso family, that masked mute who's always by your side, and even Starlight Brigade's veteran. The elf protector carried the second prince under her arm and advanced rapidly. Rubble, fragments of wood and even dead bodies flashed past the prince's vision. It took Thales some effort to breathe. He turned and saw that little rascal was being carried under Ida's other arm. Grasping her glasses tightly, she looked stupefied. I was the only one who came to look for you in Shield District. I did not foresee such circumstances. What's going on with these soldiers? Why are they attacking both of you and the White Blade Guards? No. They were not attacking me and the White Blade Guards, Thales thought in a daze. The smell of blood lingered in his nose. This made him recall the gullies around the abandoned house, and the insides of Giza's tentacles. They smelled almost the same as this. They were after King Nuven. Say something, kid. Turning a corner, Ida asked impatiently. What on earth happened? What happened? Thales felt tired and overwhelmed. He tried his best to put his memory in order. He remembered Kenveda's smile, the sound of arrows being fired by the crossbows of the Black Sand region soldiers, the countless black silhouettes shooting towards him, and the numbness as well as shivering that extended from his scalp to his shoulders and neck. Ida carried one of them under each arm, and they finally escaped the ruins of Shield District. Neat and undamaged streets as well as houses began to appear before Thales' eyes. Not a single person could be seen though. The king's orders for evacuation and curfew were indeed very effective. The elf protector navigated the streets, which were in much better condition compared to the ones in Shield District. Taking a couple of turns, she skillfully and nimbly looked for ways forward. However, Thales was still lost in the shocking memories from earlier on, unable to free himself. With a fraction of a second on their hands, the 4 remaining White Blade Guards did not even have time to complete the execution of their attacks of kneeling down and raising their shields. Instead, they turned and extended their arms without hesitation, kneeling and hugging each other in a circle. They protected Thales and Little Rascal with their bodies. Thales recalled himself and Little Rascal hugging each other without being conscious of it. They were feeling frightened and helpless. Their visions were completely blocked by the White Blade Guards. Then, the sound of countless arrows tearing into flesh rang. It was just like the sound that the butcher in the Grand Bazaar near Eternal Star City's western city gate made. It was the sound of him chopping piece after piece of meat every morning. Shivering, Thales trembled as he inhaled a mouthful of cold air. He recalled the faces of those guards. As they were ravaged by the arrows, their bodies trembled non-stop, and their faces became increasingly paler. They glanced at each other, their gazes filled with hatred and indignance. He remembered how in the end, their gazes looked peaceful as if they had resigned to their fate. It was as if rain and snow, instead of arrows, were falling on their bodies. Thales also remembered how those arrows exited the guards' bodies, piercing through their shoulders, necks, and stomachs, bringing blood along with them. An arrow even pierced through one of the guards' head, exiting through his left eye socket. The warm, splattering blood dyed Thales' face red. The bright red tip of the arrow stopped right in front of Thales' right eye. At that time, with her eyes shut tightly, Little Rascal hugged him and cried. With their eyes wide open, those guards coughed out blood. Some even flashed him relieved smiles. They hugged each other and crumbled to the ground one by one, never getting up again. You must survive, citizen of the Empire. Thales recalled how a guard gritted his teeth and grabbed Thales by his collar. His breath was faint. Protect her well and make them pay the price. He also remembered how one last, young guard rose in grief and indignation amid the dead bodies of his 3 comrades. With 5 or 6 arrows stuck into his body, he used his last ounce of strength, raised his blade and staggered towards his enemies. He sacrificed his life and performed a counterattack for the last time, delivering chaos to the bow-wielding soldiers. Kenveda's furious scream rang across the crowd of people. Thales recalled how he took Little Rascal by the hand and crawled away from the guards' dead bodies. He remembered how he was in a trance and almost at a breaking point, and how the White Blade Guards who guarded their rear let out one last, sorrowful cry. He did not even realize it when Ida appeared from the ruins beside him and charged out of the chaotic crowd with him as well as Little Rascal in tow. Until now. With a glazed expression and a heart full of delirium, Thales turned and stared at the equally horrified Little Rascal. Without realizing, he extended his hand to wipe off the blood from his face again. The blood on his face had dried up. He thought that the battle in the birch tree forest was hair-raising enough, that the breaking out of encirclement in front of the fortress was already an extremely close call, and that the duel with Giza was shocking enough. But, in the birch tree forest, Serena abducted him out of the battlefield. In front of the fortress, Uraka brought him to safety with his unstoppable charge. Even earlier, he was protected and escorted by Black Sword's fighting skills, his mysterious mystic energy as well as the strange blade of purification. It was only until blood was shed so close to him, when the guards died one by one right before his eyes, it was only when the White Blade guards were totally annihilated, and sorrowful cries as well furious roars rang one after another that Thales realized how despicable, painful and unendurable it was. Ida suddenly stopped and put Thales as well as Little Rascal down on an empty and clean street. They were standing at the corner of the street, but Ida did not have any intentions to keep going. The cloaked elf turned and fixed her gaze on the empty street. "What's the matter?" Still in shock, Thales raised his head and tried to compose himself. "We're being followed," Ida's quiet voice sounded under her cloak. "I tried to throw him off, but it hasn't been very effective." Her words were smooth, however, her tone was unprecedentedly solemn. Thales' expression changed. On the other hand, Little Rascal lowered her head and stared at her glasses, which were covered in blood. "So," the prince asked probingly. "So, the both of you should go first." Ida tapped him on the shoulder in a relaxed manner. "I'll go find it." Her palm was bloody due to the blood of various people that covered Thales' body. She then rubbed her palms together in disdain. "I'll catch up with the both of you after I get rid of that tail." Thales froze. "You go first." He recalled the night at Red Street Market. The girl wielding dual blades said the same thing to him. "The opponent is very powerful, isn't it?" Thales asked absent-mindedly. "You're not confident in winning, and have no choice but to let us go first." Under the cloak, Ida did not move at all. She seemed stupefied. Cold wind glazed past the empty and hazy street. The sun was starting to rise, illuminating the space with a faint green light, which was exclusive to the dawn. A few seconds later, Ida suddenly raised her right hand and swung it at Thales' forehead. Smack. Ida flicked his forehead hard with her finger once again. But this time, Thales did not try to stop Ida. Instead, he quietly let the latter flick his forehead. "Huh." Ida was a little taken aback by Thales' reaction. "Why didn't you try to stop me at all?" Thales felt the burning pain on his forehead. He shook his head with a grave expression. It was as though this was the only way for him to feel alive. "Otherwise, you won't be at ease about us fleeing by ourselves," he said, feeling down. Ida seemed a little angry. She raised her right hand once again and seemed to want to hit him. But Thales did not move at all. Ida's hand hung midair. A few seconds later, she sighed in disappointment and lowered her hand. "Hiya, you're no fun," the cloaked woman said in resignation. "You're a dead fish just like Mindy's." "So it's true." Thales inhaled deeply and said in a deep voice, "that the enemy is very powerful." HMPH. Ida was as expressive as usual. She shrugged and threw her arms open in exaggerated motions to show how relaxed and nonchalant she was. The elf fanned herself with her palm. "How powerful can a sneaky person who hides around be? As for you, stop worrying so much about adult matters." Fanning herself strangely in the cold weather, Ida said, "Besides, as a prince, you will have to grow up one day. I can't be protecting you all the time." Thales lowered his head. "Don't think too much." Ida's tone slowly became dejected, and she put down the hand she used to fan herself. "This is a test for you from me." At that moment, Thales felt a little sad. It felt as though something was lodged in his chest. "I get it." Taking Little Rascal's hand, he said in a choked voice, "We will go first and wait for you there." "I'm already used to it a long time ago, aren't I?" Ida's tone became spirited again. "Hurry up then. After this corner, go straight and you'll reach West Express Avenue. Upon reaching the end of the avenue, you'll see the blockade. I don't suggest seeking out the patrols, because we don't know what their attitudes will be. Hide for a bit if there's really no other way. The others are looking for you too, and they'll pay special attention to children. You'll be safe when you meet people like Ralph or WYA. As for me," Ida paused fleetingly. "I'll catch up soon." Thales lowered his head and did not say a thing. The next moment, as if he had made up his mind, he dragged the stupefied Little Rascal by the hand and broke into a jog. However, he suddenly stopped. Staring at him, Ida tilted her head. She seemed puzzled. "Hey, Ida." Thales turned with difficulty. "I know that you may not like it when I ask you this, but I really want to know." Ida put her hands on her waist. "May I know if you're—" Thales took a deep breath and solemnly said, "The Oath Keeper, Mindy's the Fourth's queen, one of my great-great-great-grandmothers." Hearing this, even the dazed Little Rascal could not help but raise her head. There was silence. Ida's expression could not be seen under the cloak. A few seconds later, the elf protector sighed. "Hey, stupid brat." Ida raised her head, allowing Thales a clear view of her unusually delicate, smooth and fair chin. She flatly said, "Stop meddling in matters of the elders." Thales froze momentarily. He then pursed his lips and forced a smile. The next moment, Thales grabbed Little Rascal and broke into a run without turning back. His figure disappeared into the corner. Staring at Thales' disappearing figure, Ida inhaled loudly. But she immediately turned. Her entire body trembled. "That person's coming." Ida stood at her most vigilant. She swept her gaze past the empty street from the corner to the roofs, and from the alley to the low walls, letting nothing slip. This is such a shish-tty situation. The piercing pain and numbness on her skin told her that the enemy was a ruthless person. How long has it been since I encountered such a powerful opponent? When I conquered the peak of Wild Vast Mountain with Kira. Show yourself, Ida said flatly. I can sense your presence. Footsteps rang. A tall and big figure emerged from the corner, appearing in front of her. Ida's pupils contracted slightly. It's you, the elf exhaled. Her tone was filled with sarcasm and disdain. The boss of the tavern. Caslin stared at Ida with an indifferent gaze. I heard that you were a senior member of the White Blade Guards. Snorting softly, Ida emphasized the word, senior. Ground shaker, right. Even though you're wearing a cloak, I can see that you are an elf, Caslin said slowly. His tone was stately and ruthless. As an eternal being, you definitely have more experience than me. Ida was immediately at a loss for words. She exhaled in annoyance and whipped out her exquisite machete. I heard that you were the one who killed Zyra Darkstorm, the human slaughterer. Ida said nonchalantly. You're very powerful, aren't you? That's the battle I'm most proud of to date. Caslin nodded and walked closer to Ida. Of course, part of the honor belongs to this thing. The old man walked out of the corner and revealed himself completely. There was a long stick in his hand. No. Ida furrowed her brows. That's not a stick. This was once my comrade and friend. Zyra Darkstorm died by it. Caslin raised the weapon in his hand, showing its black and hideous head. He then slowly said, the Soul Slayer pike. Ida froze. Soul Slayer. The elf's face twitched. The next moment, she forced a smile. Mother. FCKER. Ida inhaled deeply. She placed one hand on her waist and tried to appear relaxed. Oh. Speaking of the Darkstorm tribe that's been around since ancient times, in the past, it was a powerful tribe that had rights to contend for the throne. Narrowing her eyes, the elf chuckled unnaturally. As the old man approached, she got into a fighting stance without realizing it herself. It must have been tough for you. You seem to be very experienced when it comes to orcs, Caslin said in a deep voice. His footsteps slowed down. The Darkstorm tribe, of course. Ida waved her machete and positioned herself in such a way that she seemed nonchalant. The first tribe my father met when he led troops to aid the humans in battle was Darkstorm. The elf snorted softly. When my father chopped off their heads. It was like chopping vegetables. Ida rapidly waved her machete 4 times in the air. Chop, 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 chop. 2 heads with each swing. She chattered non-stop. Caslin stopped walking. He narrowed his eyes to look at the machete-swinging elf. He turned the pike in his hand slowly. Hey, I'm not lying, the elf said loudly as she observed her opponent's posture and breathing carefully. Yes, I wasn't lying. Apart from one detail, Ida thought. At that time. I wasn't born yet. Ellipsis. Lampod stood amid the ruins and furrowed his brows. He was as stern and silent as usual. The ground in front of him was littered with dead bodies. Some belonged to the White Blade Guards and the others were of Black Sand Region soldiers. Going back and forth, his subordinates were busy removing the dead bodies. Covered in a grey cloak exclusive to members of the White Blade Guards, King Nuven's ice-cold dead body lay beside the Archduke. Lampod lowered his head and stared at King Nuven. He placed his hand on the hilt of his worn saber with a complicated expression. We lost 28 men, Viscount Kenvida approached Archduke Lampod from behind and said in a low voice. 15 more are so gravely wounded that they need to lie down. 4 sustained light injuries and are still fit for combat. Lampod did not say anything. The White Blade Guards pledged their lives to launch a counterattack. We underestimated their military power, and overestimated our own military power at the same time, Kenvida sighed and said. The dragon's appearance really shocked the soldiers. If we hadn't trained them and indoctrinated them over the years, I'm afraid they would have changed sides. Archduke Lampod raised his head and averted his gaze from the king, who was also his uncle. More than 10 White Blade Guards were enough to throw the regular border troops we take pride in into a panic. The Archduke exercised his neck slowly and inhaled a mouthful of Dragon Cloud City's cold dawn air. How did Charlton manage to break through these men's protection and assassinate King Nuven? Kenvida lowered his head. You know, they're the Charltons. The Viscount nodded respectfully. Fortunately, many of the White Blade Guards were killed, injured or lost amid the chaos brought about by the calamities. Forget it, at least we have confirmed our king's death. Archduke Lampard's gaze was solemn. He raised his head and looked at the tallest building in Dragon Cloud City. How much longer? The Archduke said flatly. His tone was stately in itself. Kenvida bowed respectfully. 2 hours at most, Kenvida quickly replied to the seemingly random question. The Chief Disciplinary Hall and the Chief Garrison Officer will become suspicious when they don't receive the king's reply. They will then dispatch men to search for him in Shield District. Of course, Vlad's people can find ways to stall them, and the people in Dragonwings Plaza and even Shield District can give them some trouble. Kenvida seemed well versed with everything. The Archduke's chief advisor continued speaking. If there's no result after 4 hours, Prime Minister Lisbon will sense that something isn't right. He will definitely start gathering his forces and even the regular troops just to control the chaos that may be caused by the king's disappearance. But he does not have the king's personal order. Together with the curfew issued because of the calamities, it will make gathering a large number of recruits impossible. However, if it takes up to 6 hours, I reckon that the truth will be hard to hide. The movements of our 1,000-something men will also be detected. Lisbon only needs to place an order, and the feudal counts outside the city who are still loyal to the Walton family would lead troops and enter the city. It's impossible to fight head-on against them. Our soldiers are already emotionally unstable. In the blink of an eye, we would be utterly defeated due to our men's casualties, weariness and lack of morale. We only have less than 2,000 men. Even if we managed to conquer a sturdy gatehouse, we would not be able to hold on to it for more than half a day. In the end, Kenvida concluded carefully, we must fight a quick battle. Archduke Lampod stood under the overcast sky and stared at the outline of heroic Spirit Palace. His expression was still as cold as ice. Half a day, Lampod snorted coldly, it's enough. The Archduke turned and flung his cape, revealing his armor. He walked with firm steps like that of a fighter in the direction of heroic Spirit Palace. Kenvida as well as the other subordinates led the soldiers and followed closely. Send a letter to the other units who are clearing up the mess according to plan. Tolja, Vlad, Krosh, ask them to join Levan and Vic. They should almost be done preparing, the Archduke ordered coldly as he walked. Whether it's by stealing or by brute force, we must take down the gatehouse between Axe District and Heroic Spirit Palace before 8. Kenvida nodded respectfully. Spread the rumors according to plan. This will buy us time. Lampod strode past a soil pit and resolutely said, by 9, or latest by 10, all of this must end. Kenvida nodded and gave orders to the person next to him. A few seconds later, the military courier left. Another thing, Kenvida said softly, I just received news about the Prince of Constellation. Archduke Lampod turned and looked at his advisor with an odd expression. It's them. Kenvida raised his head, revealing a strange gaze. They sent word that they want the boy alive. Lampod stopped walking. He turned and looked in the direction Thales and Ida disappeared in, seemingly absorbed in his thoughts. Chapter 192-650. On an empty street at dawn, Thales raced down an alley, panting. He then came out to a wider roadway. Ida should be fine. Despite how unreliable she seemed, she had taken down a supreme-class blood clansman in the birch tree forest on her own. I can't be distracted. There's no use in thinking too much about it. It won't help. Thales tried desperately to shrug off his worry. He felt thirsty all of a sudden. Thales scooped up a handful of snow out of habit, something he adopted as a child beggar during the winter. He then rubbed the ball of snow and stuffed it into his mouth. Then the prince, whose jaw chattered in agony due to the snow, looked up at Little Rascal and asked, is this place West Express Avenue? However, the latter remained speechless. Her head was lowered. Thales melted the snow in his mouth and swallowed the water. He stared at the dazed Little Rascal, feeling concerned. The tragedy they witnessed in the palace, the havoc caused by the calamities, the assassination of the king and the blood spilled, this horrid day had terrified the poor child. Everything that happened was too much for her. Even he was on the verge of a mental breakdown. How did all of this start? The moment Lampod sent his soldiers to escort me to Dragon Cloud City, he had planned all of this. His aim was to assassinate the king, and start a coup. How did he do it? If a legion of 2,000 men were ignored because they came with him under the name of escorting him, then, when he brought the army into the city, did the vassals, nobles, citizens, soldiers, and officials not notice them? King Nuvan appeared to be a brilliant king. The creepy old lady Kalshan seemed far from harmless. How could the two of them allow such a flaw in the capital city's security? Unless... A horrifying answer arose. No way. He swallowed slowly and walked on, holding Little Rascal by the hand. He decided to think from a different perspective. I drew in the mystics, didn't I? The fight between Giza and Asda wreaked havoc on Shield District. It demolished the entire area, and affected a significant portion of the armed forces in Dragon Cloud City. That was why King Nuvan left Heroic Spirit Palace and came to Shield District. So, the one who will take the blame for the king's assassination will be me. Thales was alarmed by his thought. If this was truly caused by the mystics and me, how incredibly lucky Lampod was. Thales rubbed his forehead vigorously. His highly efficient brawn, which had helped him greatly in the past, was in distress. He sighed, putting these concerns aside. He forced himself to stay focused despite the extreme fatigue and continued his journey. This had to be West Express Avenue. If he was not mistaken, this winding, empty street was Armor District. Ida had mentioned that the blockade set up for the calamities lay beyond this path. He would run into people from the capital there. Thinking of this, Thales hesitated. She also told him that the patrol teams, or people who were dressed in patrol uniforms, were suspicious. She was not certain how many of them worked for Lampod. It was best not to trust them. Even the ones who were loyal to Walton could easily divulge his information to Lampod. The once magnificent King Nuven could no longer protect them. Hiya. How ironic, he was with the granddaughter of Extit's king, but they ended up running for their lives in Northland's capital. They could not even find a person they could trust. In such a critical time, it was best to seek help from a dependable individual, head back to Heroic Spirit Palace, back to Poutre, and inform Walton's loyalists. Thales stopped in his tracks. He peered at a shop sign at the corner of the street, which was a few steps ahead. His expression changed as though something crossed his mind. When King Nuven can no longer protect us. There was a tiny, black dagger was printed on a shop sign before him, and below it was a tightly shut, giant wooden window with a narrow door next to it. Thales narrowed his eyes. He recalled a conversation he had in the past. If you run into a dangerous situation that you cannot resolve no matter what in Extit, a problem so great that even King Nuven cannot save you from. Thales' eyes beamed. That was it. At the next second, he headed towards the shop's sign, dragging Little Rascal along. Bang, bang, bang. Thales knocked on the wooden window under the sign with the dagger. They might be under curfew and all the residents there had been evacuated, but if the shop owner was indeed just like he had heard and was often up to some shady business. There was no response. Bang, bang, bang. Thales knocked thrice again. Still, no one answered the door. The prince frowned, reaching his fist out once again. Bang, bang, bang. Amid the increasingly loud knocking, Little Rascal recovered from her state of shock, and asked in a perplexing manner, where are we? A butcher's shop in West Express Avenue, Thales answered briefly. Anyone in there? We need help. Bang, bang, bang. He knocked a few more times. Still, there was no response. Thales felt the hope in his heart slowly sink. Hiya. He stared at the shop sign and heaved a sigh. The guy in there had most likely evacuated as well. As Little Rascal eyed him weirdly, a disappointed Thales turned away from the butcher's shop, pulling her along. After he took the first step however, he jolted and stopped walking. What's going on? Little Rascal asked blankly. Thales whipped around, and shouted at the shop sign. 650. There was no response. Thales clenched his teeth, and shouted again. Hey, 650, 650. Perhaps, he was yelling a little too loud. Thales began to pant, patting himself on the chest. There was still no response. The two of them were the only people on the empty street. Thales lowered his head dejectedly. Forget it. Perhaps he. Suddenly, the sound of friction between wooden planks rang, followed by the sound of the door unlatching. Pluck. Little Rascal hid behind Thales out of instinct, whereas he looked up in surprise. The wooden window was opened. Someone's inside. In the window, a man with black hair and eyes, as well as flat, rounded facial features was glaring at them. It made Thales feel his skin crawl. Wait a minute. He's a Far Easterner. Who are you people? How do you know about this? The Far Easterner clearly had a Northland accent. He sounded rather impatient, as though he was dealing with big trouble. 650. Thales was startled. There's someone here. There's someone here. He gawked at the man until the latter attempted to close the window. Thales then recovered from his shock and excitedly said, Wait, we are Caslin's friends. This code was given to us by Caslin. He said that when we needed help, we just had to come here and say this code. The Far Easterner narrowed his already small eyes, appearing to be inspecting them closely. You are, Thales scratched his head, trying to recall his meeting with Caslin in Hero Tavern. A few seconds later, he managed to wring the words out of his brain. It's Mr. Gu, isn't it? We need help. The Far Easterner, Gu, remained silent. He stayed idly in the shadows behind the window frame, watching them. Please. Thales was panicking slightly. A moment later, Gu opened his mouth. Caslin's friends, are you? The Far Eastern man gave a light hum and slowly said, Come in. Ellipsis. At the intersection point of Armor District and Shield District, a duel between the Supreme Class fighters had begun. Whoosh. A blade was swung with a swooshing sound. Ida hopped into the air, charging at Caslin. Her machete drew an arc in the air, fleeting past the tip of his nose. The former commander of the White Blade Guards wore an emotionless expression, and leaned back calmly as he ducked the blow, which was aimed at his head. The blade was merely an inch away from his nose. Getting your feet off the ground in a fight is suicide, Caslin said flatly. He wielded the 2-meter-long Soul Slayer pike. His movements seemed effortless and swift. The spear then began to curve as he swung it. As though it had come alive, the spearhead slashed at the elf with a sharp swoosh. Like many duels between Supreme Class warriors, the defense and offense positions switched within seconds. Your rule only applies to humans, Ida said with disdain in the air. At the next second, she nimbly grasped the top section of the Soul Slayer pike in one hand and applied some slight pressure. The black pikehead of the Soul Slayer pike swung past her ear. Ida hung from the spear like a fluttering cloth, following Caslin's movements as she danced in the wind. A great force surged within Caslin's arms, and the spear trembled. Ida was shaken off the spear as if she had received a violent blow. Caslin's spear did not slow down or hesitate. Like a viper that sprung up to strike, it shot through the air, targeting Ida's waist. Nevertheless, Ida exhibited the agility of a bat once again. She leaned her torso backwards in the air, with her legs stretched to her back, her body curved into a C shape. Poof! The spearhead pierced the air, emitting a booming sound. However, Caslin's deadly spear arrowed through the hollow space created by Ida's posture, fleeting past her back. It was a close miss. Caslin frowned and the spear advanced again. Ida pulled her left hand back, grabbing the handle of the Soul Slayer pike and following the direction of Caslin's attack. Her flexible torso sprung like a spring. Using her left hand as a center point, she took a full circular swing on the Soul Slayer pike, and with the help of the momentum, she bounced backwards. If Thales had been present, he would have probably gaped and shouted, "You know how to swing on the high bar." The elf performed an acrobatic flip in the air, and landed steadily on her feet. Clunk. In the meantime, the spearhead also landed, jabbing into the stone tile. The treacherous match ended right then. Carrying her machete, Ida stood up. Her hood had flopped down to the back of her neck due to her drastic movements, revealing her silky, braided white hair. Caslin, on the other hand, was twirling his spear, his calm expression unchanged. "I have fought enemies from White Mountain, and met the envoys from Late Dusk Kingdom," the old tavern owner said slowly. "But the color of your skin is neither of the white elves or demon elves." Ida lifted her chin, revealing her exquisite, girlish face and a pair of sharp, perfectly curved ears. "You're a sacred elf, aren't you?" Caslin exhaled softly, adjusting his spear-wielding posture. "Of course, I've never met high elves and gray elves from the East Peninsula, but I guess you're most likely from Sacred Tree Kingdom, that's why you're in the Prince of Constellation's entourage." "Good guess," Ida snorted, eyeing the Soul Slayer pike vigilantly. "Little Northland brat." Caslin nodded and smiled. "I know that Sacred Tree Kingdom is a longtime ally, and royal-in-law of Constellation." The old man sighed and said, "But I didn't expect that the kingdom would even go as far as to assign a supreme-class bodyguard to Constellation." Ida's expression changed. "Bah," the elf waved her machete in frustration. "What bodyguard? I am a supreme-class elite warrior. Their grandfather, grandmother, father, mother begged me repeatedly and hired me with the promise of high pay." There was a slight jerk in Caslin's eyebrow. "I am a tenured honorary instructor of Constellation's Royal Guards." The elf pointed at herself with the machete, and announced proudly, "Ida Laura Carter Giselle Dorilos." Then, as though her words were stuck in her throat, she stopped abruptly. She rolled her silver eyes, and looked down in frustration. "Hiya, I cannot remember what comes after, call me however you like." In the meantime, Caslin's expression turned grim. "I see, the instructor of the Royal Guards." The spearhead in the old man's hand was raised. The way he looked at Ida changed. "We White Blade Guards often say that, other than the Glacial Sentries, if there's another armed force that can rival the elite troops of the White Blade Guards, the Dragon's Imperial Guards, it would be you, what we call the Emperor's Praetorian Guards, the Royal Guards of Constellation." Caslin heaved a sigh, his eyes were brimming with nostalgia. "Whoa," Ida swung her arm with contempt. "So, you do remember that you're a member of the White Blade Guards, when your people were taken down, one by one, were you there to witness it?" Hearing that, a painful look appeared on Caslin's face. His eyebrows wrinkled into a knot. "They were a group of good warriors, good kids," the old man said sadly. "They just happened to meet their worst fate at the worst time." Ida gave a cold huff. "Look who's talking, the legendary, ground shaker, as it appears, is only a traitor." Caslin squeezed his eyes shut. "Let's get this over with. If we continue to stall for time, our men will arrive. We won't have the chance for a fair duel." His voice sounded incredibly weary. Ida remained quiet, staring at him coldly. "Throughout history, fights between the Dragon's Imperial Guards and the Royal Guards have been rare. I sparred with Zachriel once when I was young." "It was an honor," Caslin said, opening his eyes. His white hair glimmered under the frail dawn light. "Instructor Ida." "Zachriel." Ida's expression changed. She looked as though she was reminiscing. "Was he that snot-dripping, donkey-faced brat who slacked around on the training field every day? I often punished him. He is the notable Knight of Judgment in Constellation." Caslin smiled in nostalgia. "I haven't heard of him for 12 years. Ida's expression darkened. "That fellow is in the prison of bones in the western desert," the elf said, sighing. "He will most likely be in there for the rest of his life, that silly kid." Caslin was slightly startled. "Really?" the old man mumbled. "What a shame." Caslin shut his eyes regretfully. He was a good opponent. The next moment, the fight resumed. Caslin's spear sprung up without warning, stabbing at her 3 consecutive times. They were all aimed at Ida's legs. Zoom, zoom, zoom. The spearhead zapped into the ground 3 times, stirring up countless gravel. But as if she was performing a peculiar and graceful dance, Ida took 6 consecutive steps. Each time, she landed just in time to avoid the attacks. Amid the splattering gravel, Ida did not retreat. Instead, as she dodged the gravel, she came close to Caslin. Thus, the defense and offense positions switched once again. Swoosh. While Caslin was not able to withdraw the spear, Ida launched a surprise attack, swinging her machete at his head. The legendary commander of the White Blade Guards whipped around and dodged the attack. His experienced eyes never left Ida's shoulders. Following Ida's moves, the blade was turned abruptly 3 times. Each slash targeted the directions in which Caslin intended to move towards. Nevertheless, relying on his sharp eyes and intuition, Caslin managed to dodge the 3 murderous slashes. The blade shot past the old man's face. And it sliced off a lock of his white hair. Caslin finally withdrew his spear. The old man lifted both arms, and waved the spear, drawing a large circle around him. SSSSSSSs. As the spearhead was dragged on the ground, the friction caused an ear-splitting sound. Meanwhile, Ida had already performed 2 back flips in the air, far away from the Soul Slayer Pike's range of attack. The nerve-wrecking exchange came to an end. The 2 Supreme-class warriors put the fight on hold once again. Excellent flexibility and agility, Caslin said, sighing. Good combat instincts, sturdy slashes, nimble footsteps. You have perfectly exhibited the dual advantages of being both an elf and a woman. Ida chuckled, eyeing her opponent's face closely. You will suffer if you underestimate a woman, you know. Each of them stood on the opposite side of the street, staring at one another in silence. Both were highly vigilant, and secretly calculating the other's next move. I would never dare, Caslin said with respect. After all, I was a contemporary of the Heart of the Rhine. Nonetheless, these are all the natural advantages of an elf. There's nothing surprising about them, the old man said flatly. Ida's pupils contracted. Caslin stared at the surface of the ground, his gaze focused on the 3 stab holes. What surprises me the most is, you've managed to provide a good countermeasure to every offensive and defensive move without delay. It's nearly perfect. Ah, Ida shrugged, her sharp ears wiggled. I'm just really good. Haha, really? Caslin's expression brightened, his face was beaming. I attacked your legs to restrain your movements. I splattered the gravel to counter your agility. The last swing of the spear was to get you for good as you were closing in. The old man nodded with admiration. Yet you've managed to evade the stab aimed at your legs, and in turn came at me, dodging the splattering gravel, and countering. You even dodged my swing in the end. Caslin lifted his chin, peering at Ida. All 3 of my attacks, merged into a combo, yet none of the attacks have succeeded. This can't be explained away with good reflexes or experience. He shook his head slowly. There's only one possibility. Ida's expression remained unchanged, she tightened her grip on the machete in her hand. That combo earlier was spot on. But... Caslin sighed, his utterance was intertwined with huffs and puffs of heavy breathing. You knew what my next moves and tactics were, and responded with the perfect countermoves, isn't that right? Ida's expression changed. No way. This old fellow. How long has it been since we started fighting? Caslin chuckled. At that second, the legendary ground shaker seemed to revert to his younger self. I've heard that the possibility of elves obtaining psionic abilities is far higher than that of humans. It's an interesting phenomenon, isn't it? The old man swung the Soul Slayer pike once again. The spirit of a warrior burned in his eyes. There's a wide variety of psionic abilities. Each is unique in its own way. Asda's expression darkened. She paid the infamous Soul Slayer pike all her attention just now, but now, as it appeared, compared to the Soul Slayer, she had underestimated the ground shaker. Back then, all she had heard of him was that after he left the Tower of Eradication, he never lost a battle as the leader of the White Blade Guards. But... Caslin's eyes gleamed and he calmly said, however, I didn't expect to encounter such a unique psionic ability. Ida sighed. Instructor Ida, you're a psionic, no, you're of a supreme class, so I have to call you a psionic warrior. Caslin stared into Ida's silver eyes, and said in an unrelenting manner, you can read minds. Chapter 193 Choose who you want to become. Thump. Gu slammed 2 large bowls of hot, fuming meat broth on the table's surface. Thales and Little Rascal, who were washing their faces with cold water in the corner, looked up in puzzlement. They ogled the expressionless Gu. The feeling of hunger, which had been masked by terror and fright earlier on, was rekindled in the prince's stomach. I heated them up with eternal oil, the smoke will fade indoors. No one will find out that we're here, Gu said flatly as he sat down opposite the 2 of them. He raised his thick right eyebrow meaningfully. Of course, it's not cheap. I'll make sure to add this to the fees you owe me. Little Rascal's stomach growled just in time. The girl glanced at the boy beside her timidly. Thales swallowed. What now? Gu stared at the 2 stupefied children, frowning. He then said impatiently, are you waiting for me to offer you napkins and serve you some grape wine, my young master and lady? The moment he had said this, Thales as well as Little Rascal exchanged glances and blinked at one another. At the next second, the two of them leapt onto the chairs like horses being rid of their reins. They lifted their bowls and gulped the meat broth. Drink slowly. Watching them gobbling their food, Ji-yu heaved a sigh. When you're done, we'll talk about the important stuff. Within a few minutes, the two starving children had finished their meat broth. They leaned back in their chairs, rubbing their bloated bellies and panting. Little rascal even let out a loud burp. She lowered her head nervously. Thales exhaled contentedly. So, Ji-yu placed his right hand on the back of his left hand. His fingers moved up and down like ocean waves, slowly tapping the table. Before Ji-yu finished, Thales caught his breath. Looking up, he anxiously said, we need help. Yeah, I can see that. Ji-yu scanned him from head to toe. His eyes were filled with disdain. Tell me something I don't already know. Holding Thales' gaze, Ji-yu said with indifference, for example, in this chaotic night, where it's nearly dawn, why are there two children wandering in Armor District, which should already have been evacuated much earlier? And you even did so in a humiliating manner, like dogs with tails between their legs. Thales was slightly taken aback, and instinctively said, we. However, his words died in his mouth. The prince opened his mouth hesitantly, then decided to shut it for good. His instincts and experience as a prince told him that one could not always trade all of his or her intel for sincerity and understanding. He learned from the example set by Serena and Black Sword. We got into trouble. Thales took a deep breath, and said seriously, we need to head to Heroic Spirit Palace in secret and without catching anyone's attention. Can you help us? We will reward you. Ji-yu stopped tapping his fingers. His hands were clenched into fists and he stared at Thales without once moving his body. The man's gaze was calm, like an undisturbed surface of a lake. Nevertheless, it unsettled Thales. He could not help but sat up properly and straightened his clothes. This Far Easterner. Why is he giving off a strange vibe? As Thales was about to lose it, Ji-yu slowly began to speak, Heroic Spirit Palace. Is this another power struggle among the nobility? The corners of Gu's lips curved in a cold, cryptic smile. The Far Easterner's black eyes were deep and dark. Thales could not see his pupils clearly. Sneaking to Heroic Spirit Palace from Armor District, do you know how difficult it is? The distance, the hill, the city gates, the road blocks, and the blockade set up since yesterday. Ji-yu stared at Thales in the dim light. I can clear up some space for you and let you stay here. But sending you into Heroic Spirit Palace without being noticed, and getting dragged into a political scuffle between nobles. The Far Easterner shook his head. The coldness in the corner of his eye chilled Thales to the bone. Sorry, I don't owe Caslin that much. He rejected them. Thales turned his head, glancing at little rascal worriedly. They could not just stay there and wait for trouble to catch up. Lampard's operation, Nuven's assassination, the unfortunate events they encountered, these issues needed to be. What about contacting someone? Thales looked up and said while feeling uneasy, you can't send us over, but can you contact someone on our behalf? Facing Thales' worried gaze, Ji-yu smiled. It will not be easy, but it is not impossible. Ji-yu narrowed his eyes. Who shall I pass your message to? Thales lightened up. However, as he opened his mouth and the words were about to be said, Ji-yu interrupted him. Choose with caution, kid. Don't choose the ones I can only reach by shouting from Heroic Spirit Palace's front gate. Ji-yu lowered his head slightly. Due to the dim light, his eyes were enveloped by the darkness. He then said meaningfully, if you're really in danger, it's better to choose someone you can trust, who's less attention-grabbing. After all, I too am not keen on getting myself into trouble. Listening to Gu's advice, Thales was puzzled. The first person who came to his mind just now was Putre. Ida said the vice diplomat sent some men to look for him. Perhaps, he could also send someone. No. The prince shook his head internally. Thales did not know how tight Lampard's surveillance was in Dragon Cloud City, but if the current situation was as bad as he expected, then the Constellation diplomat group led by Putre would become the huge target of Lampard's attention. Their presence would be especially striking in the now calamity-ravaged city, with each district under curfew. Even if they managed to find his location, they would most likely be stopped by the enemy halfway. The same could be said of the people loyal to King Nuven, such as Nicholas. He needed another candidate. Thales frowned. A trustworthy person, someone who has secret dealings with both King Nuven and Lampard but appears neutral. This person will therefore seem unnoticeable. Preferably, this person should have some useful tactics and connections, so that he or she will be able to take action after receiving this man's message. Thales' eyes focused. Thales took a deep breath, returning Gu's gaze. Actually, I have a name in mind. He has numerous connections, you will definitely be able to contact him. Gu's eyes were fixed on him. 5 seconds passed, and the Far Easterner nodded slowly. Thales gave a sigh of relief. A few minutes later, Ji-yu put on a hooded cape and stood at the doorstep. I'm not certain how long I'll be gone. After all, it requires time to locate contacts, maybe dozens of minutes, maybe longer than that, the Far Easterner said grimly. Before that, stay still. Do not touch anything in my store. Thales could only nod, implying that he understood. Gu surveyed the outside through the wooden window. When he was assured of the situation, he grasped the door knob. Mr. Gu, as the light crept into the butcher's shop while he was about to leave, Thales blurted out, "Thank you." Gu had a cryptic expression as he turned his head, and glanced at him. The Far Easterner gave Thales a half-smile, nodding. Nevertheless, Gu's last words before he walked out of the shop unnerved Thales. "Please wait patiently." Gu turned back around and his faint voice trailed off. "Your Royal Highness." As he finished, Gu shut the small door. The darkness engulfed the butcher's shop once again. Thales was left stupefied where he stood. The prince turned his head to Little Rascal, who was sitting at the table. The two gawked at one another. "So he knew my identity all along. That's why he didn't ask me about it." Staring at the small door that Gu walked out of, Thales pressed his hands on his forehead, sighing in anguish. "What's so conspicuous about a scruffy kid running on the street? Asda, Black Sword, Gu, why does everyone know who I am at first sight?" Thales pivoted on his heels, glancing at the chopping blocks and boning knives around him. He shrugged helplessly and dejectedly. He climbed into the chair by the dining table with difficulty, lifting a wooden mug and drinking a mouthful of water. He caught a glimpse of Little Rascal next to him. The girl was gazing at the table's surface with a vacant look in her eyes. Her face was without expression. Thales sighed internally. "Take a nap." Thales put down the mug, and said, "You must be exhausted." "Huh." As though she was abruptly awakened, Little Rascal recovered from her stupor and stared at Thales. Thales pursed his lips, shaking his head helplessly. "You need rest. We may have to get back on the road soon." Gazing at the absent-minded girl, Thales tried to speak in the softest voice he could manage. Little Rascal, on the other hand, merely ogled him. "Thales," the little girl said dolefully, "I feel as if I'm in a dream." Little Rascal lowered her head. "A nightmare, a never-ending nightmare." There was a slight pause in Thales' breathing. Little Rascal spoke haltingly. At first it was Lady Alex, then there was the monster in Dragon Cloud City, now His Majesty. The girl's eyes were glistening behind her lenses. "All of this, when will it end?" Thales closed his eyes. His heart was laden with unspeakable gloom and sorrow. She was just a child. She was only a little older than Coria, Ryan, and Cindy. She was forced to witness all of this. Soon. Thales heard himself say blankly, "Soon, everything will come to an end, it's going to be fine." However, a dark, gloomy voice in his heart was saying an entirely different thing. "No. The moment you become a Walton, everything you've seen will never end." He heard himself say words he did not agree with. "When we're back with the Walton family, and back among the people serving the Waltons, we'll be safe. Regardless of their purpose, they will protect the bloodline of the Dragon Spear family." Hearing this, Little Rascal shuddered. The sobs in her voice became more obvious. "Thales, I don't want to be Bisaroma. I'm not a Walton. What His Majesty told me to do, I can't do it." Thales did not speak. He merely clutched his fist, staring at the ground. "It's true," Little Rascal sniffled. Her eyes were red. "I'm just a servant girl who was picked up from a house full of orphans, not Lady Alex." Thales remained quiet. "Besides, I'm a girl. This is Northland. Throughout history, aristocrats or commoners have never allowed a girl to be an archduchess." Little Rascal took off her spectacles, shaking her head in dismay. "Let me go. I can't do as His Majesty ordered. With me, I'll mess it up. I don't know anything." Looking at the weeping Little Rascal, Thales slowly lifted his chin. "You can." Little Rascal's sobbing stopped in an instant. She looked up, and with a lingering whine in her voice, she asked in bewilderment, "What?" Thales flatly said, "You can leave." Little Rascal was startled. "King Nuvan has passed away. It's uncertain if Nicholas is dead or alive." As for Merc, Thales gazed at her calmly, getting off his chair, and striding forward. "Now, no one can force you to be Saroma Walton." Thales approached her slowly. Slightly shocked, Little Rascal recoiled toward the back of her chair. "You have the chance to stay away from this mess. Dragon Cloud City is in turmoil. A missing servant girl hardly catches anyone's attention." Holding Little Rascal's astonished gaze, Thales continued, "Moreover, so many things have happened in Heroic Spirit Palace alone." Little Rascal sniffled fiercely. "Really?" The girl's voice was laced with a hint of shock and doubt, which later turned into fright and fear. "But, why are you?" Thales stopped, standing a few steps away from her chair. He loosened his clenched fist, staring into the girl's green eyes. His lips then curved upwards. "Because you are you. Perhaps there is not much leeway, but everyone can, and is supposed to choose who they want to be." Thales shut his eyes, then flipped them open again. "You will become the person you choose to become." In that instant, Asda's prying words, the story that Lady Gines told him, Yodel's confession in the Path of Shadows, Gilbert's agitated expression as he stood before the portraits of the three Constellation Kings, and Kessel's lonely silhouette in the Jadestar family tomb flashed across his mind. Deep in his thoughts, He went on subconsciously, despite the fact that we are often coerced by life, by others, by society, by overarching power to become someone they want us to be. Little rascal gawked at Thales as the strange boy gave her a bitter smile. Wiping her face clean, the girl blinked and asked instinctively, like, becoming a prince. Thales' gaze stiffened. He stared at little rascal in silence, and sighed, yes. Like a prince. Therefore, if you want to run away, if you want to give up, if you want to stay away, I will not stop you, I will even lend you a hand. Little rascal was clearly astonished. She froze, her gaze transfixed on Thales. The prince sighed. Kessel's words rang in his ears. After being conferred the Jadestar surname, to battle for Constellation, die for Constellation, and live for Constellation. He refocused his gaze on little rascal, staring directly into her eyes. But before that, have you thought about yourself, who you really are, who you want to become? Little rascal's eyes widened. What? Thales shook his head, ignoring her puzzled look, and continued to speak. Are you little rascal, a servant girl who completed homework on someone's behalf, a bookworm in the library? Are you Saroma Walton? Are you a poor unfortunate soul who was unwittingly dragged into this mess? Little rascal froze in her seat. Her breathing became ragged. In Alex's eyes, you are her inferior servant girl. In King Nuven's eyes, you are the last hope of the Walton family. In the eyes of the Queen of the Sky, you are an interesting girl who unknowingly wore her spectacles, Thales said calmly. But who are you in your own eyes? Who are you? He asked her the same question he asked when they first met. Little rascal's eyes were gradually clouded with uncertainty. Slipping back into little rascal due to fear and past habits, choosing to become the noble Walton girl due to vanity, choosing to run away from everything due to pressure, I think these choices are of the same nature. They are not what you truly want, but because you are being forced to be someone you are not ready to become. At that very moment, silence shrouded the small butcher's shop. Little rascal sat in her chair in a daze, staring at Thales who was standing before her. Her eyes were brimming with confusion and panic. What about you? A few seconds later, little rascal lifted her chin in confusion. She looked like a person who was struggling her way out of the water, seeking a lifeline. Who do you think I am? Am I supposed to be a servant girl? You. Thales smiled. He shook his head. You are a luckless, poor unfortunate soul who's been dragged into all kinds of troubles with me. Little rascal's eyes dimmed. She lowered her head and pouted. Thales looked her in the eye and exhaled softly. But, you are also a brave and strong-willed girl who's been through nightmares in hell with me. In fact, you're still sticking around after all that. Thales gave her a sad smile of gratification. If you become an archduchess, I think you'll be much better than King Nuven and Archduke Lampod. Little rascal looked up again. Her eyes shone with astonishment and surprise. From what I've seen, you aren't completely unequipped to become a Walton. As little rascal kept her gaze on him, Thales continued. You've been reading for years in Reikeru's library. You can memorize every book you read, and you know every historical event like the back of your hand. You finished Alex's homework, and perhaps did it better than her. Besides, Thales recalled what happened yesterday as though it had long passed. The images in his memory had become like yellowing pages in a book. In times of despair, when we faced those horrid monsters and when I was in the gravest danger, you did not once abandon me, despite the consequence being the possibility of a painful death. The prince looked little rascal in the eye. Little rascal pursed her lips, wiping the trail of tears off her cheeks. I'll tell you another secret, Thales began. Little rascal blinked. A robust, sturdy figure surfaced in his mind, along with a pair of menacing azure eyes. When I became a prince, my father asked me a similar question. Thales' eyes were vacant and unfocused. His soul was no longer in the butcher's shop. It had drifted off to the faraway eternal star city. Are you prepared? He asked me. Without realizing, he chuckled. How did you answer? Little rascal asked expectantly. Thales turned, returning her gaze. I said, no. And then, the girl's eyes gleamed. What was your father's reaction? Thales stared into little rascal's eyes in silence while remaining still. In the end, the latter looked away, feeling slightly embarrassed. A few seconds passed. Thales sighed. He said, it is fine. Because, fate will prepare everything for you. That's what he told me. Little rascal was stunned. Thales exhaled a puff of air through his nose as though he had just gotten rid of the biggest shackle on him. The prince smiled in a way that he believed looked like the most confident smile. So, don't be scared. Don't panic, you have lots of choices. Thales held little rascal's hand gently, and earnestly said, when we get out of here, you can find out who you really are, choose who you want to become, it doesn't matter if you want to leave or stay, I won't stop you. Little rascal stared at him, mouth wide open in a daze. Before that, you don't have to think about anything. Now, you are just a loyal companion of mine in our journey for survival. Thales fixed his stare on her. That's it. Little rascal gaped at him as if this was her first time meeting him. Little rascal sniffled, and as if she still did not quite understand what he meant, she said, okay. Thales arched an eyebrow. Now, take a nap. We need energy and stamina. Little rascal nodded obediently. Thales then heaved a sigh. He had calmed her down at last. Thales turned around and climbed into his chair. Gu's chair was soft, the kind of wood it was made of was unknown. Thales, little rascal muttered behind him, thank you. Thales paused. No, he lowered his head in dejection. I'm the one who dragged you into this. Or else, she would have just been a servant girl who hid and read in the library, and all she needed to worry about was Alex. Right. The two children lay in their respective chairs, shutting their eyes for now, with temporary peace in their minds. Amid the darkness, little rascal's timid voice sounded, Thales, are you really just 7? Why do you know so much? Hearing that, Thales, who was adjusting his sleeping position, snorted with laughter. He opened his eyes, seeing little rascal in her chair. She was lying on her side with her eyes shut. It reminded Thales of when she was sound asleep by his bed in the guest room. Who knows, he slipped off his chair, and headed to the corner of the room. Maybe I'm already 37. As usual, Thales lay down against the corner wall. His head was pillowed on his hands. Feeling the double protection from the ground and the wall, he felt much calmer. I just don't look old. Little rascal's giggle sounded beside him. Thales laughed too. Choose for yourself, choose who you want to become. He repeated this to himself in his mind, recalling what he had told Asda before the mystic left. Yes. I shall survive this ordeal. I shall stay alive. Then I'll choose who I want to become. No one can force me. No one can stop me. He closed his eyes gently. Drowsiness and fatigue washed over him. Chapter 194 Ice Cold. In a dream long overdue, he seemingly returned to that bizarre, grotesque world. There, the girl with the indistinct appearance but gentle voice hugged him from behind. She softly said, "What's the matter? Are you feeling very sad?" He covered the computer and smiled bitterly. "No, this outcome was expected, perhaps, I'm not brilliant enough." He looked down somewhat dejectedly. "You know, they have very high demands." "It's all right," the gentle voice breathed into his ear. "I have a way to make things less depressing." He raised his brows and shrugged. "Oh. Because there's something even more depressing waiting for you." He blinked as he failed to understand her words. She gently said, "Let's break up." A shudder ran through his body. The girl behind him did not say a word. He turned his head around rigidly. "What?" "Yes, you didn't hear wrong. It's because you're failing badly right now," she dully said, "so I want to break up with you." His brain stopped revolving as he stared blankly at her indistinct face. He was at a loss. "Why?" The voice behind him sighed. "All right, it's settled then." In a daze, he breathed. He was sort of in denial. It felt like there was a need to justify something, yet he found it a little unnecessary. She. At this very moment. "All right." The voice broke out in a laugh as it rang cheerfully. 10 seconds after we've broken up, I now announce that we are getting back together. Ta-da, allow me to introduce my new boyfriend, Woo Kiran. He could not think straight for a while. What? However, a few seconds later, his heart started to beat again. He gasped for breath and looked at her in bewilderment. You. How about that? Aren't things a lot less depressing compared to the agony of being dumped just now? In the face of setbacks, we have to cherish what we have right now. There was happy laughter as the voice breathed into his ear, causing him to feel a little aroused. My name is Lei Feng, no need to thank me. He was silent. The voice then cheerfully said, very well, if you feel as if your life is a tragedy again in the future, I will continue to console you like this. He took a deep breath and shouted angrily, damn it, woman. Hey, can you not treat such a serious matter like breaking up and getting back together as a joke? I'll think it's real, alright. He felt the sensation of a chin colliding into his back. Ah, that's nothing. The owner of the voice jabbed her chin into his back while she exclaimed, did you know that there's a serialized author online, who out of the blue pens, the end, as if he's penning his final remarks whenever his story reaches a climax. He'll claim that he's finished the book, but without a word, renews it with a new chapter, doggedly saying that he's writing a new book. Now that's what we call reaching the peak of perfection, okay. Then don't learn from him, okay. In his memory, the voice laughed cheerfully. His voice was filled with an exasperated resentment and also a sense of relief. Finally, the voice stopped fooling around. She lay languidly on his back and embraced his chest. Hey, Kiran, don't be afraid, she mumbled. Whatever happens, I've got you covered. He lowered his head and closed his eyes. Ah, I know. You've got me covered. The voice did not speak, instead she tightened her arms that were embracing him. But in a matter of a second, everything in the dream billowed and began to shatter, inch by inch, just like how the reflections on water would disappear when they are disturbed by ripples. The girl disappeared right before his eyes. Amid the confusion, an ice-cold, displeased female voice rang in his ear. Its tone was downcast and it contained indescribable emotions, causing every hair on his body to stand. I'm watching you. I warned you. The next moment, Thales woke up from his dream. He took in large breaths of air. That voice. That voice. At this moment, a hand was placed on his shoulder. Still panicking, Thales turned his head around. It was Gu, the man who just shook him up from his dream. The Far Easterner squatted by his side and looked at him in an unpleasant manner. Next to him, Little Rascal stood with a face of uncertainty. Wake up, Prince of Constellation, the owner of the butcher shop plainly said. The person you're looking for is here. That quick, Thales brought his spirits up and temporarily suppressed the scenes from his dream. He rubbed his eyes as he got up from the cold ground. He has many social connections, so he did not need much time. Gu stood and shook his head. Furthermore, he's come to pick you up. Thales was stunned. He shook his head in an attempt to wake up from the lethargy earlier. He came to pick me up. Observing Gu's gestures, Thales and Little Rascal followed him out of the shop's door. On the empty and uninhabited street was a two-wheeled carriage with a coach. It had a window made of transparent, cheaply made glass. The coachman on the carriage bowed contritely. A middle-aged noble with a blonde ponytail was standing by the side. The latter heaved a breath of air. Your Highness, thank God. Thank you for your help. Thales nodded. We're short on time, please get on the carriage immediately. The middle-aged noble was obviously relieved upon seeing him. He took off his hat and bowed. We went through an interrogation by a wave of patrols upon entering Armor District. Despite their good acting, I dare swear that they were definitely not patrols of the city. They were not even locals. Thales nodded, and with a dignified look, he said, of course. They're from Black Sand region. Lampod has planned this for a while. As the middle-aged noble stared at him blankly, Thales looked at the carriage. It's too conspicuous. Thales frowned. A carriage, transparent glass, will we be able to leave, and also get back to Heroic Spirit Palace? For a short while, the middle-aged noble digested the news from Thales. He raised his head to answer the prince's questions. I'm using the name of Good Flow City's caravan to unload important cargo from Armor District, and the charter given to me previously by His Majesty. The noble lifted his staff and knocked it against the wheel of the carriage. I also happen to know a disciplinary officer who receives bribes, and he cleared some guard posts, so he turned a blind eye as we exit from the blockades under his supervision. There will be no news escaping. As for the glass, please rest assured that this is a specially made carriage. From the outside, you can only see me through the glass, nothing from the back. When necessary, you can even hide in the secret coach. Thales looked at the carriage and exhaled. Let's go then. He raised his head and looked at the blonde noble from Camus. Marquis Shiles Bamra. Shiles nodded and opened the carriage door. His eyes were fixed on Little Rascal, who was hiding behind Thales. This is, he narrowed his eyes. Little Rascal shrank in fear. My female servant, she saved my life on the road. I cannot leave her behind, Thales calmly said. Very well, let's discuss it on the road then. Shiles stopped pursuing the matter. I also need to hear your explanation on what exactly happened. Thales and Little Rascal then boarded Shiles' carriage. Shiles sat in front while they hid in the space behind him. They were completely unnoticeable from the outside. Just as the carriage door was closing, Thales stuck his head out. By the way, thank you, Mr. Gu. The Far Easterner tilted his head and looked at him with a strange expression. He revealed an inexplicable smile. Don't thank me. Gu rubbed his hands together and smiled mysteriously. Thank Caslin, thank him for the bread he gave me back then, which cost 650. That's enough. Gu turned around and walked into his own butcher shop. 650. So that's what it was. Thales smiled. The door closed and the carriage started to move. Shiles watched Gu's figure disappear behind the door and he frowned. How did you strike up a relationship with Dragon Cloud City's famous intelligence broker? It was by accident, Thales bluntly said, a lucky accident. It was now time to deal with proper business. The carriage drove past several segments of streets. He raised his head and looked at Marquis Shiles ahead. Please tell me if Heroic Spirit Palace, the other city districts, and Dragon Cloud City are still under the rule of the Walton family. Marquis Shiles frowned. Before I entered Armor District, everything from the White Blade Guards to the Palace Guards, patrols and even the officials seemed normal. Of course, with the king leaving the palace with troops in tow, the devastation inflicted by the calamity and the Great Dragon's return, some guests, the Archdukes included, felt some emotional instability. However, Prime Minister Lisbon has thought of every possible method to make them settle down. Nonetheless, he changed the topic and said in a low voice, my spy in the disciplinary hall as well as my peers, channels have both informed me that His Majesty never showed up, and that there were no commands conveyed. Only scattered White Blade Guards appeared after resisting the calamity, yet we obtained no information from them. From the chief garrison officer to everyone in the chief disciplinary hall, they are all anxious. Not long ago, the Prime Minister was still discussing whether to disregard the king's curfew and dispatch a large number of patrols into Shield District, or not. Thales breathed a sigh of relief. So, Heroic Spirit Palace and Dragon Cloud City are generally still safe. Safe. After encountering those patrols who interrogated us, I have my doubts. Shiles shook his head and worriedly said, first, you have to tell me what exactly happened in Shield District after the calamity destroyed it. What about His Majesty? And how did you end up here? Thales took a deep breath and looked at Marquis Shiles, who had his head turned back. He enunciated his words clearly. King Nuven was attacked by an assassin. He is dead. Shiles sat in his place with a blank expression. His face changed subtly with each rise and fall the carriage went through on the bumpy road. The murderer was a man with the surname Charlton, and the person who hired him was Lampod, Thales quietly finished. Little Rascal looked at them timidly. So, it seems that it is true. Shiles came to his senses after a long while. He stroked his gloves and staff, while he subconsciously said, the king is dead. Extit is going into chaos. The crystal drop or agreement. Lost in thought, Marquis Shiles gazed at his staff. He seemed to be urgently calculating his gains and losses. Thales was silent. He did not speak. Soon, the carriage drove out of Amor District's range. By the winding streets of Dragon Cloud City, they entered a road block formed by patrol soldiers and chevaux de frise. They had arrived at the blockade. Thales nervously watched as the coachman conversed with the lead disciplinary officer. The coachman then shoved a letter and money pouch into the disciplinary officer's hand. The disciplinary officer shot a glance at the carriage's glass and Marquis Shiles waved at him in a friendly manner. The carriage passed through successfully. Thales, who lay desperately flat at the bottom of the couch with Little Rascal, finally exhaled. Don't worry, Shiles smiled stiffly. Businessmen have many social connections and they're very useful. There's no problem when it comes to settling those of the lowest rung. The number of people surrounding the carriage started to increase. Everywhere, there were residents of the capital whispering in one another's ears. Some stopped by the streets in ragged clothing. Many kind-hearted people were giving out food and supplies to these pitiful people who were stranded on the streets. These are all the evacuated residents. They have been homeless for a few hours, at least, that's how they will be until the decommissioning of the king's curfew. Marquis Shiles looked outside the window and shook his head. Of course, I've heard that compared to the people of Shield District. At this moment, however, a huge commotion was heard outside. An anxious-looking man came running from the street. He yelled while he ran. Both Thales and Shiles frowned as they exchanged a look in bewilderment. The crowd began to gather in one spot, then they started moving forward with that man. The surrounding discussions grew louder and soon, there was a commotion everywhere. Immediately after, the crowd's emotions began to get out of control. Some were howling in grief, some were hysterical while others cursed at the skies in fury. Their carriage had no choice but to slow down as well. Soon, the man disappeared into the crowd. However, the people did not disperse. As before, they gathered into circles. With their loud voices, they engaged in heated discussions in twos and threes. There was no lack of people shouting in agitation and people engaging in fisticuffs. The Northlanders' temperaments were on full display. What happened? An ominous premonition struck Thales' heart. I don't know, Marquis Shiles replied solemnly, but we will find out. Then, Marquis Shiles deliberately stopped the carriage at the next corner of the street. Abiding by his gestures, the coachman asked a patrol soldier who was maintaining order, but also agitatedly arguing with his colleagues about something, to come to the side of the carriage. Marquis Shiles opened the carriage door halfway and stuck his head out. I'm from Camus, a partner of King Nuven's. The blonde noble with the ponytail handed out a silver coin and put on a friendly smile. May I know what just happened? The soldier seemed to have been involved in an intense debate. As he was gasping for breath, he was stunned to see the silver coin in his hand. He raised his head again, and saw the golden wheat and dagger symbol on the carriage. Sir, something so great has happened, how could you not know about it yet? The soldier calmed down from his previous agitated state. After he regained his composure, he appeared somewhat reserved. That's why I need you to clear up the confusion. Marquis Shiles fished out another silver coin and gently said, just mention a selection of what you know. The soldier looked at the silver coins in his hand again and pocketed it subconsciously. The soldier adjusted his armor and shook his head. He exhaled as his face turned unpleasant. This is what happened. His Majesty, King Nuven was attacked by an assassin. Shiles' expression changed in a timely manner. What? How did you find out? Thales was hidden behind the Marquis as he clenched his jaw and listened silently. I heard about it from someone. Watching the Marquis' reaction, the soldier seemed to be encouraged as his words began to flow smoothly. It's being spread to the entire of Dragon Cloud City. It's about the murderer. Surprise struck Thales' heart. Marquis Shiles furrowed his brows. Who's the murderer? Those citizens of the Empire. The soldier raised his head and shouted in anger. They want to trigger civil unrest in Extit. The soldier's words grew resentful. His tone was laced with fury and hatred. Those damned Empire scum, and the Prince of Constellation from the south, they ganged up with the Calamity and even set up an ambush with fighters and assassins in Shield District. Those sons of B*TCHES of Constellation. They murdered the common elected king. Shiles silently sighed. Behind him, Under Little Rascal's panicked gaze, Thales was in a daze as he leaned against the coach and gasped for breath. His heart was ice cold. Chapter 195 Spirit of the Contract. It was early morning in Dragon Cloud City. A two-wheeled carriage drove across a chaotic street, skillfully shuttling around. As the carriage advanced, the cries of resentment outside the window grew lesser. In the coach, Marquis Shiles turned around and looked at the silent Thales. The Marquis shook his head silently in his heart. After all. Are you okay, Your Highness? The Marquis from Camus tentatively asked. As though he felt something, Thales raised his head and glanced at Shiles absent-mindedly. By the side, Little Rascal felt that something was amiss in the atmosphere and she secretly inhaled. Under the subtle gaze of the Marquis, Thales sighed after a long while. Yes. Just a little tired. Shiles gripped his staff with a solemn expression on his face. What are your plans, Your Highness? Thales closed his eyes and took a deep breath, expelling all the terror and uneasiness in his heart. I have to pull myself together. Especially during such times. The prince clenched his fist and he felt the wound caused by the dagger on his palm. It hurts. But I seem to understand a little now. He opened his eyes and his gaze was firm. With regard to Lampard's daring actions to risk assassinating His Highness and even personally lead an army into Dragon Cloud City, we must rush to Heroic Spirit Palace as soon as possible. It's war again, isn't it? Marquis Shiles sighed. He shifted his gaze towards the streets outside the window. Initially, his expression was hesitant, but with concern, he continued with, is there any other circumstantial evidence regarding the king's assassination? Wave upon wave of white blade guards surfaced before his eyes as he recalled the scene of them using their body to resist bows and arrows for the two children. He remembered the last white blade guard's contorted face, the image of him struggling to turn around and face an attack. The dragon's imperial guards. Thales came to his senses and shook his head. Perhaps not. Judging from Lampard's character, he probably would have cleaned it up well. Any news on Lampard or the others? What about the people in Shield District? None, as far as I know. Marquis Shiles tugged his cuffs lightly and faintly sighed. Seems like things have gotten a little troublesome. Yes, Thales said, his voice low. He quickly pondered over the situation before him. Nobody would have thought that Lampard would use such rapid, violent and extremely effective measures. I'm afraid that there are not many occurrences of an Extachian king being killed by his own archduke. Not even one. A young female voice rang in the coach. Thales and Shiles were both stunned at once. They turned their heads around to Little Rascal. In the recent 200 years or so, the Tannen family of Prestige Orchid region attempted to assassinate the common elected king, but their plot was exposed. King Kasa gathered the troops of the other archdukes before the Tannen family's castle and erected the Rockney family's cannon of Knight's Banner. Upon finishing her sentence, Little Rascal blinked and touched her head as though she was trying to recall a memory in detail. On the seventh day, the mourning archduke, Emerson Tannen, who violated the joint ruling pledge, was tied up and sent out of the city by his subordinates as well as the seething, discontented citizens. The girl raised her head and said with certainty, before everyone's eyes, King Kasa personally pierced through the traitor's chest with the Soul Slayer pike. Jacob Olsius was the first to detain the mourning archduke and he sent him out of the city. Later, he became the first archduke of Prestige Orchid with the surname, Olsius. Thales and Shiles frowned. With a weird expression on their faces, they listened and waited for Little Rascal to finish. Little Rascal took notice of the other two's expressions. She blushed and shyly lowered her head at once. They exchanged looks. You mentioned that she's your servant. Marquis Shiles was a little doubtful. Yes, this part of her was exactly what I took a fancy to. Thales stroked his head. A little embarrassed, he quietly nudged Little Rascal, causing the latter to lower her head even further. Hey. Really? Shiles cast a meaningful glance at Little Rascal and revealed a sly smile. So that's the case. Thales quickly switched topics. So, whether it's committing regicide or rebelling, both seem to be intolerable offenses in Northland. Shiles nodded and sighed. How could Lampard have such guts? Even if he pushed all the guilt onto you. Thales put his hands down. His expression was solemn. He remembered Viscount Kenvida from Black Sand region and the Fire Knight of the Five War Generals. I'm afraid that we have underestimated Lampard, he silently said. Thales suddenly raised his head. But there's still one hurdle he cannot go around. The prince narrowed his eyes. That is if his intentions are indeed what I think they are. Shiles fixed his gaze on his staff. For instance. Too many things are still shrouded in mystery. There's a need to sort out the clues once again. Thales shook his head, and his expression grew more solemn as his brain revolved frantically. When did Lampard start planning this and how did he execute all of this? The carriage turned a corner. Is this important? Things have already worsened to such an extent. Marquis Shiles fished out a fine pocket watch with a copper chain. Forgive me for being frank. Apart from clarifying the facts, maybe you should consider how to escape. I can provide you with some methods. This is very important. Thales slowly nodded. Step by step, he straightened out his thoughts. Things have worsened to this extent because we underestimated Lampard previously. Let me ask you one last time. Shiles' face turned serious. I can discreetly send you out of the city and even back to Constellation at this very moment. Are you sure that you want to go back to Heroic Spirit Palace, back to that unpredictable vortex? Thales did not seem to hear his words as he was occupied with his own thoughts. We are still not clear about the full picture of Lampard's plan, so let us go back to the beginning, to when his plan first started. Shiles silently observed the young prince as his impression of him slightly rose in his heart. Under such circumstances, how many people could still restrain their fear and think calmly? Such a pity. The Marquis silently sighed in his heart. The prince's eyes became still all of a sudden. Your Grace, a thought came to Thales as he subconsciously asked, why did King Nuven want to find Pofret? Why did he want to find Lampard's collaborator? The Marquis of Good Flow City raised an eyebrow. Why did King Nuven want to find Pofret? Do you really need to ask this question? Because Archduke Pofret killed his son. Shiles rolled his eyes as he did not seem to understand the prince's question. His expression was strange as he tried to answer Thales, and it just so happened that King Nuven found out about it. Thales shook his head. Because King Nuven acquired the information of Lampard's investigation, Disaster Sword, remember? Thales' eyes grew clearer and clearer. This information linked both my assassination and Prince Mariah's to Broken Dragon Fortress. Hence, all of you decided that Lampard had a collaborator, consequently causing King Nuven to desire revenge. A world of ice and snow surfaced before Thales' eyes. Those were the words both Nicholas and Shiles told him a few nights before he arrived in Dragon Cloud City. Shiles did not answer immediately. He paused for a bit, seemingly in deep thought. You mean? Thales slowly exhaled. His eyes were solemn like never before. I'm afraid that the moment I first set out from Black Sand region, the moment Nicholas received news about Disaster Sword, and the moment King Nuven decided to seek revenge, we all fell into Lampard's trap. With an unpleasant look on his face, he bowed his head slightly. From the side, Little Rascal could see his expression and she was too afraid to even exhale. No. It's still not enough. Some clues are still lacking, some crucial clues. A plan that can be executed on such a large scale, in such a long period of time, Thales murmured, from planning to execution, Black Sand region to Dragon Cloud City, assassination to transportation of troops, operations to maintaining secrecy, it is absolutely not something a remotely located Archduke can complete on his own. Lampard definitely had an insider as his helper. I agree with you when it comes to this. Marquis Shiles nodded with a serious expression. For this to become such a huge issue, I believe that Lampard did have a helper. You have vast connections. Any leads? Thales' eyes glimmered. In your opinion, who's the most suspicious? At this moment, as if a thought had occurred to her, Little Rascal suddenly raised her head and extended it to look out the window. Her face turned pale and she nudged Thales. Only then did Thales notice that their carriage had stopped. Marquis Shiles kept the pocket watch he had been caressing for the longest time into his pocket. He sighed. Your Highness, we have arrived. Thales' heart moved. So soon. I remember Heroic Spirit Palace is at. Heroic Spirit Palace is still a little farther. Shiles interrupted him and blinked. You'll be escorted by another officer for the rest of the route. Thales was a little stunned. What? In the next moment, their carriage door was opened. A gruff voice that caused Thales' expression to change traveled into the small carriage. Marquis, many thanks for your help. A middle-aged noble in martial attire that Thales was more than familiar with, held the door with one hand and his saber in the other. Under the protection of densely packed soldiers, he ascended their narrow carriage. Otherwise, we would have had to spend a lot of time looking for our guest. The newcomer sat down. His sharp gaze was like a sword, sweeping past Thales and Little Rascal. It felt as though Thales had been struck by lightning and his heart had fallen into an ice cave. Little Rascal covered her mouth as a result of the shock. Her eyes were shrouded by horror. The ruler of Black Sand region, Archduke Chapman Lampard, was sitting peacefully next to a smiling Marquis Shiles. He calmly closed the carriage door. In the face of Archduke Lampard, Marquis Shiles radiated with the friendliest smile. It was the same smile he had when he first met Thales. The Marquis leaned forward slightly, and in a respectful tone, he said, "It is my honor." Lampard snorted lightly and turned his head around. His cold eyes swept across Thales. You're really good at running, young highness. Little Rascal recalled the bloody scene from earlier and shivered in fear. The prince just stared blankly at the Archduke of Black Sand region in front of him. He remained motionless. Fear and panic instantly crept up his heart, but he forcibly suppressed them again. No. Chapman Lampard. Shiles Bamra. This means that. A few seconds later, Thales finally recovered from the shocking scene before his eyes. Shiles Bamra, you. He turned his head around and looked at the Marquis of Good Flow City in disbelief. You betrayed us. Lampard said nothing. His face was as cold and serious as ever. Don't be so surprised, your highness. Marquis Shiles sighed regretfully and slowly shook his head. This doesn't suit your typical image of a genius. Moreover, I didn't betray you. Didn't betray me. Thales laughed in exasperation. Don't tell me that from the start. Thales paused and his face changed. It can't be. In that instant, he realized that he could be right. You were that helper. Thales looked at Marquis Shiles, who was beaming from ear to ear. His face was filled with disbelief as he said, "You've been partners with Lampard from the start." "You're quick to come to this realization, Young Highness," Lampard said sarcastically. A second later, Thales bellowed with shock and anger, "Shiles, you've betrayed King Nuven." Little rascal shuddered slightly. Lampard scoffed in disdain. However, Marquis Shiles frowned. Thales gripped his endlessly trembling fist as he stared furiously at the Black Sand region soldiers, who were donned in patrol uniforms outside the window. They had fallen into Lampard's hands once again. They were in a situation more despondent and terrible than the previous time. Tisk, tisk, the Marquis of Camus shook his head as if he was somewhat disgusted by Thales' words. "Don't say that, I hate betrayers and serial villains the most, I've never betrayed King Nuven either." Thales desperately tried to suppress his impulses in fury. "I thought you had an agreement with King Nuven, and worked for him." Of course, he needed to seek vengeance against the culprit who betrayed Mariah. Shiles shrugged and appeared indifferent. "That's why he needed me. It takes a third-party candidate like me who can intercede freely among the archdukes and not trigger any suspicion." The Marquis blinked. "The crystal drop or agreement for vengeance. It's very fair." Thales gasped for breath as he glanced at the unsmiling Lampard. "But you betrayed Nuven." No, Your Highness." Shiles sighed. He raised a finger and shook it lightly. "You've misunderstood." Shiles opened his eyes, and they were filled with sharpness. Yet, there was an indisputable trace of sincerity. "I am someone genuine and someone who keeps his promises. Keeping to the spirit of the contract is the first creed of the Bamra family." Spirit of the contract. Thales gripped his fist tightly and clenched his jaw in fury. "Right." Shiles nodded and unfolded his left hand. "I faithfully fulfilled my agreement with King Nuven to help him find and deal with the enemy. He was satisfied, and I was a willing participant." Shiles raised a finger as well as his eyebrow, and shook his head. He seemed to be blaming Thales for doubting him. "I kept to the spirit of the contract." The Marquis' eyes were very clear. There was no trace of remorse or shame. It was as though these were his true colors. Thales took a deep breath. The sin of Hell's river surged up his head in a timely manner. Finally, Thales slowly eased his breath and his brain started to calm down. Marquis Shiles maintained his friendly smile and blinked. "And now, I'm just fulfilling another contract I undertook with Lampard. As always, I'm adhering strictly to my promises, still keeping to the spirit of the contract." Thales released his clenched fist and watched Lampard's hand, which kept its hold on the saber. He gave up on his notion of touching his dagger. "How much have you done for Lampard?" Thales coldly said. "Did you help him prepare supplies? Or did you directly commit the regicide?" Shiles exhaled and exchanged looks with Lampard. The latter's eyes were filled with cold intent. "I think not much." The Marquis retrieved his staff and smiled faintly. "I provided His Excellency with some news from Heroic Spirit Palace, those regarding the king's whereabouts and the progress of his plans. I mobilized some contacts from Camus, caravans, delivered news and items through conventional channels, covered up some news, prepared some weapons and transported some people into the city with the travel charter granted by His Highness. Of course, when it came to disguising and substituting them into patrols, it was Sir Vlad's task." Upon hearing Shiles recounting one chilling news after another, Thales looked up sharply. "When did this start?" "When Nicholas came looking for me. When I entered Dragon Cloud City," the prince said indignantly. "Or have you simply been Lampard's insider from the very beginning?" Marquis Shiles smiled without a word. "That's enough," Lampard spoke up from the side. With his cold words, he glared at Shiles mercilessly. "We are on a tight schedule." However, Thales had no intention of paying attention to his enemy at all. "What did he give you in order for you to risk the greatest taboo and cooperate with a kingslayer?" The prince snapped. "A contract, money, power. After deducting the price you had to pay, how much more was it compared to what King Nuven gave you?" Shiles shook his head. "No, the problem does not lie in how much Archduke Lampard has given me." The Marquis turned to Archduke Lampard with an apologetic smile. "You can't simply look at profit and numbers when it comes to doing business. Sometimes, some public praise and networking is required. King Nuven was a pretty good collaborator, but even for a business that's already in the bag, you should still leave some room for backup plans." Upon hearing that, Thales was stunned. He followed up with a cold laugh. "So Lampard and Black Sand region was the backup plan you prepared aside from King Nuven and Dragon Cloud City?" Marquis Shiles turned his head around, pushed open the carriage door and tapped his staff on the footboard. "You're wrong again. A backup plan isn't any prepared person or item. It's sort of a philosophy." Shiles turned back around and laughed. He gestured at Lampard with his palm. "The Archduke has proven his value and potential. So even if we hadn't come to any agreements beforehand, he would have naturally become my backup plan when he showed up before me." Thales scoffed in disdain. He circled his gaze back and forth between Lampard and Shiles. Through gritted teeth, he said, "Shiles Bamra, what about after Lampard? Have you prepared a backup plan for him?" Lampard raised his head slightly and cast Thales a chilling gaze. It appeared as though he was looking at a dead person. Thales' heart froze. Giles stepped off the carriage without glancing backwards. His words were jovial. "If I were you, Your Highness, I would start thinking about my escape plan and not sow dissension in vain." Lampard snorted. Very logical. Thales clenched his fist tightly and did not say a word again. He scanned the densely packed soldiers outside the window. No. They don't stand a chance. His heart was filled with despair in that moment. Behind him, Little Rascal clutched his arm tightly. "I'll hand over the following matters to you now." Marquis Giles turned around and gave a slight bow to Archduke Lampard. Then, he smiled at Thales. "Don't worry, Your Highness. As of promised, His Excellency will send you to Heroic Spirit Palace." "Thank you." Thales scoffed in disdain. "Thank you for keeping to your spirit of the contract." Marquis Giles smiled as though he did not feel offended at all. Lampard extended his hand and slowly held the handle of the carriage door. "After this, I'll get my people to send the carriage back." Lampard exhaled a breath of cold air and nodded at Giles with a cool expression. "I will remember Good Flow City's friendship." Giles let out a hot breath and watched his coachman get down from his seat. Another soldier from Black Sand region then took his place. "No, there's no need." The Marquis shook his head. His eyes were laced with an underlying meaning as they swept across Lampard and the two children. With a tone full of pity, he said, "I think I won't be needing this carriage anymore." They were silent for a few seconds. "This is goodbye, Your Excellency." Marquis Giles straightened his grand clothing, which had creased from going up and down the carriage. Then, he adjusted his bowler hat. His next words sounded respectful. "May all your endeavors go as you wish, and your heart's wishes be fulfilled." The carriage door that Lampard was prepared to close suddenly stopped in its tracks. The Archduke of Black Sand region paused for a while and turned his head around. He looked at Giles with a stern gaze. "My heart's wishes be fulfilled. You think I will succeed?" Lampard plainly said. Thales' heart jumped. Succeed? What exactly are they trying to achieve? Of course, you have a unique perspective and temperament. Marquis Giles exhaled with a sigh. "I'm honored to be able to witness such an important, crucial, vast and magnificent part of history." Thales' heart grew tighter as he spoke. Important and crucial. Vast and magnificent. History. Lampard laughed bitterly. Giles held his staff with both hands and nodded slowly. The smile on his face was as humble and respectful as before. "I have full confidence in your future, Your Excellency. There is no doubt within me about that." The look in the Archduke of Black Sand region's eyes was complicated. He looked at the Marquis with a subtle expression, and only nodded in response a few seconds later. "Good day, Prince Thales." Giles turned his head around and looked at Thales, who had an unpleasant expression on his face. In the same respectful manner, he presented him with his wishes. But Thales sensed an incomparable sarcasm in his words. "May you and your servant have all your endeavors go as you wish, and your heart's wishes be fulfilled." The door closed and the carriage started to move. Only this time, the person staring at Thales in the carriage had become Chapman Lampard, who had an ice-cold expression. Thales took a deep breath and tried his best to turn to the Archduke of Black Sand region at his calmest and at the peak of his condition. Under Thales' murderous gaze and Little Rascal's fearful eyes, Archduke Lampard appeared absent-minded as he drew out his old saber. His frightening gaze was immediately focused on the prince and the girl beside him. "Young prince, I didn't know, when did you get a female servant?" In the face of the blade's cold glare, Little Rascal shuddered a little. At that instant, Thales could only feel his skin crawl. Chapter 196 The Manipulator 1. Thales gaped at Lampard's sword, halfway out of its sheath. This was not the first time he was in grave danger, and based on Thales' understanding of this world, it would not be his last. However, he did not have the slightest clue as to what he could do, stuck in a carriage with the bloodthirsty Archduke Lampard, and hundreds of soldiers outside. Should he channel his so-called mystic energy once more? Thales reached out and grasped Little Rascal's hand. "You must be Nuven's granddaughter, little girl," Lampard said flatly, turning his sword. The two children froze. Thales' palm was ice-cold. For a while, he did not know how he was supposed to react to the situation. He had noticed it. The Archduke of Black Sand region fixated on the old sword in his hands, his eyes were filled with peculiar emotions. Nuven brought you and her, his most important leverage, along when he went on his campaign against the Calamity. This arrangement truly exceeded my expectations, Lampard said casually. Little Rascal was dumbfounded and terrified. Thales sucked in a deep breath. What should he do? No, if this was the end, he must at least figure a few things out. Thales looked up slowly, right into Lampard's eyes. I think your actions were probably not what Nuven expected as either, King Slayer. Swish. It was a clear sound of chafing metal. Little Rascal shuddered. Thales was taken aback as well. Lampard turned his head, the sword in his hand already returned to its sheath. Do you not understand, whether it is Nuven's death or the chaotic situation right now? Archduke Lampard's gaze was complex. Thales was unable to capture much of the emotion in it. Everything happened because of you, the Archduke said. Me. Thales looked up, surprised. In the shaking carriage where the light changed every now and then, Lampard's expression grew unclear and ambiguous. If everything had gone smoothly, according to my plan with Arund, the Archduke said flatly, Constellation and the dragon would have heralded a new dawn. Until you ruined everything. Lampard's gaze sharpened and turned cold, and it was directed at Thales. In Constellation, you made Arund, who was next in line for the throne, a prisoner. In Broken Dragon Fortress, you cut off my retreat. In Extit, you brought Black Sand Region to the verge of destruction with Nuven's wrath. The words of the Archduke of Black Sand Region became unusually cold and made Thales' flesh crawl. It was you who forced me to resort to the harshest method. Thales gritted his teeth. A coward's excuse. The prince tried his best not to look at the old sheath, polished until the surface was shining, bare of any patterns, and spoke without compromise. Why not ask yourselves, why did you assassinate Prince Mariah out of rebellion? Longing for the throne. Even if the plan had failed, you had other routes to retreat, but you picked the most extreme one. Thales threw Lampard a cold glare, king-slaying Archduke. Lampard glared at him, unmoving, then gave a chilling grin. When I was about your age, Lampard smiled crookedly with his eyes gleaming, my mother took Harold and I to Dragon Cloud City. At the city gates, I witnessed a convict get executed. The moment before the execution, my grandfather's mandate was delivered, he wanted to pardon the convict. Thales frowned and glanced outside the coach. No. He still did not have a chance. However, Lampard continued, right before the mandate was read, before the king's order took effect, the executioner hastily hacked off the convict's head. Little Rascal was horrified, but as she listened to Lampard's story, a look of intrigue appeared on her face. The executioner was a dauntless warrior. His hack was clean, quick, and decisive. I still remember the raised severed head and the gushing blood to this day. And the sight of him as he casually accepted the king's mandate with his blood-stained hands. The Archduke paused. He lowered his head to look at the sword in his hand. In the coach, Harold kept comforting me. I was petrified and could not stop crying, Lampard said flatly with a blank expression. It was the first time I understood what death meant, and what carnage was. He looked at Thales, but this time, Lampard's stare was not directed at Thales. It went straight past him, and landed on the little girl. Thales' chest tightened and he instinctively held Little Rascal's hand tightly. Later that day, my mother told us that the executioner was her blood brother, our uncle, Prince Nuven Walton. Lampard spoke without emotion on his face. His sharp glare was locked on Little Rascal. Nuven Walton VII, your grandfather and my uncle, was a born killer. He was ruthless, cold, tough, and stubborn. He could not tolerate frailty and indecision, even more so after he was crowned king. Little Rascal gawked at Lampard, holding her breath. He always preferred to use the simplest, crudest, and fiercest methods to deal with his enemies, Lampard said impassively. Thales' gaze wavered. He could clearly recall the scenes in which King Nuven slaughtered Pofred without hesitation, poisoned Alex, and banished Merc. Nevertheless, what was deeply engraved in his mind was when the old king took triumph, often placed it in Little Rascal's hand. He used these methods when he dealt with the glacial orcs, White Mountain, the Alliance of Freedom, Constellation, and also, Lampard averted his gaze to the window, his voice was laced with a hint of somberness that even Thales could detect. Black Sand Region. Lampard's fingers applied some pressure around the sheath. His words turned grim and cold. The only way to deal with him and settle this was to act faster than he did, destroy him before he destroys me. In the meantime, Thales sighed. I get it now, the prince said suddenly. His words were filled with fatigue and emptiness. It began at the fortress. Lampard turned to look at him, his eyebrows arched. What? Your plot. Thales leaned back against the coach, he felt rather dispirited. It began the moment I was attacked and entered your military camp, did it not? At that time, you knew clearly that if you could not seize Broken Dragon Fortress, what awaited you would be the horrid vengeance of King Nuven, which would descend on you like a storm. Thales lifted his chin, met Lampard's eyes, and firmly said, from that moment, you decided to destroy Nuven completely, before he got you. Lampard's eyes narrowed slightly, he seemed somewhat surprised. Tell me about your plan. Thales raised his eyebrows and huffed through his nose. You just pulled off an unprecedented and impossible mission after meticulous planning, but cannot confide in anyone. You must be bored. Tell me, how did you do it? Lampard's gaze was still fixed on him, unmoving. The coach made a turn, the inertia compelling the prince and Little Rascal to tilt to one side. Thales decided to take action and initiated a conversation that he would also lead, just like what he did in the numerous field investigations and interviews from his past life. So, into that tent, when you suggested an alliance with me, the prince said flatly, you were harboring dark intentions, wishing to make certain arrangements through me. For instance, blaming King Nuven's death on him, exactly what Lampard had done. Thales thought of the days he spent in Black Sand military camp. Backstabbing allies was far more effective than the blows exchanged between declared enemies. He thought of Serene Corleone, the venomous beauty who taught him to be wary of allies. At last, Lampard scoffed lightly. No, I really intended to make peace with you at the time. I even thought of sharing my plan with you. The Archduke shook his head. His tone turned cold. Such a shame. Thales' brain began to spin. He had already determined how the conspiracy started. So, Pofret. Thales' gaze flickered. When you were investigating your mystic gun unit concerning my attempted assassination, you found a clue that traced back to Disaster Sword, but King Nuven knew about it. Now that I think about this, it was the intel you intentionally leaked to King Nuven, wasn't it? You knew King Nuven would deal with the enemy closer to him first. Thales recalled the frightful duel in the heroic Spirit Palace. You sold Pofret out to Dragon Cloud City. Lampard snorted coldly. Castellan, he said amid the sound of the carriage wheels grinding against the road, my uncle used to be in the Tower of Eradication. He was quite interested in the Disaster Swords and was fairly close to Nuven, so I divulged this information to him. Nuven would know about it from him, naturally. It was killing two birds with one stone. Castellan did not know about your plan to murder the king, did he? Thales watched him, hoping to find something in his eyes. I heard that your relationship with him was quite bad. Lampard tossed him a meaningful glance. Thales had to retract his probing gaze. Lampard shook his head slowly. When you were attacked, I instantly knew that Pofret tried to frame me. That selfish and weak fool still naively believed that we were playing a game where we could retrieve our bargaining chips at any time, or stop playing so that we can prevent ourselves from suffering losses. Thales sighed. He paid the price. He betrayed his ally and died because of an ally's betrayal. As you said, the purpose of the investigation was to leak the intel to Nuven and, of course, to root out the security leak within my troops. In fact, this investigation yielded an unexpected finding. Lampard's fingers glided across his sword. Thales looked up. What finding? Lampard shot him a cryptic look before shaking his head. Thales watched him quietly, but the latter had no intention to explain. The prince could only sigh to himself. So you used Pofret to distract King Nuven. Based on his previous experiences with interviews, Thales decided to continue the conversation from there, while you speedily began your preparations, using my assassination as an excuse to send your troops to the north to escort me. You even contacted your ally, Shiles, correct? Lampard stared at his sword, his eyes void of emotion. That was the last purpose that coward from Beacon Illumination City could serve, the Archduke said slowly, providing distractions, stalling the meeting, the banquet, and the duel. I heard Nuven had fun in heroic Spirit Palace. Thales' voice deepened. Meanwhile, he lowered his guard, especially to you. Lampard nodded. His eyes were filled with an aggressive, bright light. Pofret's death gave me half a day's time to secure my victory. You betrayed your ally, distracted your enemy, sought an alliance, sent soldiers, prepared for your plans, and wrought the final, thunderous blow. Thales sighed. Coincidentally, it happened on the same chaotic night when the calamity wreaked havoc. You really are a lunatic. He lifted his head. His gaze on Lampard was filled with disbelief. You know, no matter which part of your plan had gone awry, you are doomed beyond redemption. Lampard froze momentarily. The coach raced down an uneven road and trembled abruptly. Little rascal, who was already tense, could not help but scream. Lampard's head suddenly shot up. Doomed. The Archduke of Black Sand region raised his voice. His sharp eyes exuded a formidable coldness. Child, you know nothing. Nothing at all. Thales frowned. Lampard used an unprecedentedly firm and stern gaze to stare at him. Contained in his voice was an emotion Thales could not identify. To accomplish the grand plan with Arund, we had begun preparations many years ago, the intel correspondence, the mobilization of troops in our territories, the cultivation of talents we acquired through connections. To take down the fortress, I issued the mobilization order, rarely seen even in the history of Extit. I exhausted every copper, every drop of blood, every man in my territory. The day before the bitter cold winter was approaching, but I did not stock up on rations, or reclaim uncharted lands, or transport rations from elsewhere. I betted everything on this plan. Thales was somewhat startled. Lampard continued on, his tone grew more urgent. For this plan, Black Sand region has already spent more than what they earned to stock up food and resources. The debt I owed the Camian merchants was impossible to pay off, the economy was on the verge of collapse, the coming years would only be harder and harder. The standing army I had was not enough. 2,000 was the best we could gather, even fewer were willing to go against Dragon Cloud City. Last night, after the appearance of the Great Dragon, we had to execute some rebels. Even then, I could not directly order them to kill the king, only a vague mandate to eliminate the enemy of Extit. Any count outside Dragon Cloud City could recruit an army thrice our size. As for Walton's own recruits, if they found out about us, we would be surrounded and annihilated in no time, without so much as a scuffle. For last night, I lived off field rations, brought my meticulously trained army here despite the nearing day before the bitter cold winter. They looked at me with weariness, dejection, and doubt in their eyes. They only relied on the habit left behind by their training in the past to maintain their most basic combat abilities. My people, Levan, Kentvida, Tolja, and Vic, all of them betted on their lives and their heads, spurring the army to follow me into this bottomless abyss. We did not even consider rations or how to keep ourselves warm on the return journey. I knew that we might not get out of this alive. This was an expedition with no way out. Lampard tightened his grip on the sheath in his hand. His expression was fierce and terrifying. Thales gaped at Lampard, the grim-faced Archduke of Black Sand region, who gnawed on deer meat in the tent, whose face alternated between flashes of light and dark from the firelight, who pushed a wine goblet towards Thales but was reciprocated with ridicule and rejection. He began to appear more alive and less one-dimensional. The Archduke of Black Sand region said slowly, "Do you understand, little prince? While you sat comfortably in Renaissance Palace, receiving the royal title as your father eliminated your enemies like a run, Black Sand region and I were already doomed. What I merely did was grasp the last hope for survival in the depths of despair. I racked my brain to manipulate the situation, employed every possible and impossible manpower and resources I could attain, made several promises to the Marquis of Goodflow City, mob bosses, Camion merchant caravans, an intelligence trader in Armor District, the Shadow Shield, and the Charltons. I even made Shiles aggravate the conflict between all of you and Pofret to an unprecedented, aggressive degree, and..." Lampard stopped. He took a deep breath to calm his emotions. All of this was so that I could be as quick as possible to deal the fatal strike on Nuven before he noticed, and be as quick as lightning when I did it. The Archduke's eyes glinted. Even after all that, here I am, holding the future of our two kingdoms in my hand. Thales stared dumbly at Lampard, as though it was their first meeting. The coach raced past a street where the soldiers of Black Sand region had subtly and effectively cleared a path for them. Thales suddenly noticed that, prior to this, the number of Lampard's white hairs had increased significantly. He seemed withdrawn, his were lips pale, and eye sockets caved in. The advice Black Sword gave him before they fought Giza: in despair they seek hope, and from loss they find ways to turn the tide. They escalate favorable circumstances into certain victory and transform unexpected mishaps into support. Thales exhaled a lungful of air. I understand now. The prince closed his eyes. So this is how powerful people are. Lampard narrowed his eyes. What? Thales opened his eyes, much to Little Rascal's intrigue, and said flatly, in this fight for survival between you two, the standoff between Dragon Cloud City and Black Sand region, you are undeniably the weaker side, at a disadvantage and on the brink of destruction. The prince sniggered. Did you know that after killing Pofret, Nuven threatened to send troops to Black Sand region to pick a preferable candidate as the Archduke? Lampard looked down and snorted. As I predicted of my dear uncle. You knew your uncle, your king and your opponent, well. But he didn't know you, didn't know his nephew. Thales heaved a long sigh. You used every possible trap you could use, schemed against everyone, used all the power at your disposal and gathered up all betting chips just so that you can fight to the death when your survival is threatened. Lampard did not speak. Thales chuckled, his voice was filled with melancholy. Compared to that, Nuven Walton, the common elected king and ruler of Dragon Cloud City, held endless power and authority. Even if you had murdered his son, he still saw you as a mere, powerless archduke. Thales sighed softly and said, he was overly confident due to his power and superiority, treating you as an inferior opponent like Pofret, a trivial, insignificant existence that could easily be eliminated for fun. In this fight of survival between Nuven Walton and Chapman Lampard, you emerge as the true victor. The prince raised his chin and gazed at Lampard. As for King Nuven's failure and death, it was destined from the start. In that instant, Thales noticed that the way Lampard looked at him had changed. Good, a conversation has been established. Thales inhaled a deep breath. But there is one last thing I cannot figure out. Faced with Lampard's complex gaze, Thales spoke slowly, one word at a time. Why did you personally come to Dragon Cloud City? And how do you plan on ending this? Chapter 197 The Manipulator 2. How are you going to put an end to things? In the moving carriage, Lampard lowered his head and toyed with his sword absent-mindedly. His expression was profound and he did not answer the question. King Nuven has died, but Dragon Cloud City remains as powerful as ever. Heroic Spirit Palace still has 4 archdukes of great standing. I believe that they are not fools. Thales observed the archduke's expression and said cautiously, and the Prince of Constellation assassinating the common elected king. This ending will definitely not satisfy everyone, especially with the sudden appearance of the Black Sand region army. Thales stared intently at Lampard's face and said softly, how are you going to explain things to them? Or are you just going to not explain things and kill everyone to settle it? Lampard did not say a word and his expression was numb. Thales clenched his fists lightly. The carriage continued moving forward, and Thales had no idea how far they were from Heroic Spirit Palace, neither did he know how long it would be until his life would come to an end. There was no other way, he had to deal an even more powerful attack on Lampard now. Thales sucked in a deep breath and enunciated these words faintly. If there aren't any accidents, then, once the news of Nuven's death has spread and the King's Selection Congress is held, do you think you will still stand a chance? As expected, Lampard's gaze moved and he looked at Thales. The boy suppressed his anxiety and used his calmest expression as a response to Lampard's stare. Don't forget that you are originally Nuvin's enemy and you also have the terrifying reputation of killing your own brother. Thales enunciated his words, the archdukes won't let you become king. Lampard's gaze was fixed on his own sword. King, the archduke's voice rose in a querying tone as he said this one word. Then he snorted lightly and repeated that one word with contempt. King. You were born into the Jadestar royal family, you are the descendant of the king, a member of the natural, legitimate ruling family in all of Constellation, Lampard said airily. Of course you don't have that kind of worry, right? A thought formed in Thales' heart. During that moment, he felt as if he had caught on to something. Naturally, he pressed on, worry. Lampard ignored him, his sharp gaze still lingered on his old sword. Since the time of Nuvin's grandfather, they have treated Black Sand region as a thorn in their side. At that time, the Waltons had already begun their plans to monopolize and secure the throne in Dragon Cloud City. Little rascal blinked. Lampard continued speaking, his gaze was a little unfocused. When it came to the era of Nuvin's father, the Waltons tried to control Black Sand region by way of ordering the youngest son of the Archduke of Black Sand region to join the White Blade Guards, or using the name of the king to have his own daughter, the noble princess of Extit, marry my father, the heir to the Archduke of Black Sand. Thales frowned slightly. In King Nuvin and Pofret's duel, Thales seemed to have heard a similar story. My parents were married this way. Lampard sighed, then put on a smile that was rarely seen on the Archduke of Black Sand's face. Unexpectedly, this marriage, formed purely on the king's will, went pretty well. I heard from the old servants that my mother plotted to make my father fall in love with her and gave birth to 2 sons and 3 daughters for him. This love lasted even until father became the Archduke. The carriage continued into a narrow alley. Were they going to take a shortcut or go the long way? Lampard was still speaking. Just like that, father guarded against Dragon Cloud City's invasion with his own power, even if that invasion came from the woman he loved most. He had always dwelled on the balance between his family and power his whole life. Thales and Little Rascal listened to him quietly. The Archduke of Black Sand rarely acted this way. When I was very young, Harold and I were constantly brought back and forth between Dragon Cloud City and Black Sand region, courtesy of our mother. Archduke Lampard sighed, his gaze was filled with reminiscence. It lasted until we became adults, until Harold began taking over the administration in Black Sand region. Harold, a thought formed in Thales' heart. He was somewhat unfamiliar with this name. He is. Lampard paused for a moment. Harold Lampard, my older brother. A dark, scornful look appeared in the Archduke's eyes. A ludicrous fool, there is no one else more foolish than him in the world, he said airily. Little Rascal seemed to have remembered something. She stared at Lampard's face and she paled slightly. Thales sensed a different sort of emotion from Lampard's tone. You don't have brothers, right? Lampard's gaze still lingered on the sword. Several seconds later, he said in a lonely way, how fortunate. Thales raised his eyebrow. He remembered his older sister and older brother in name, resting in the 2 stone jars in the Jadestar family tomb, Lydia and Luther Jadestar. Lampard gently drew out his sword. The Archduke's expression was complicated. He gently trailed his finger across the sharp blade. Lampard raised his head slightly and looked at Thales. His voice turned cold. 12 years ago, everything changed. His action caused the prince's heart to grow cold. Wait, Thales's mind started turning again. 12 years ago again. That means a civil war, the likes of which Constellation had never seen before, erupted. It was complete chaos. Lampard's voice echoed in the coach, talking about the history that Thales was now incredibly familiar with. Since the Fourth Peninsula War, an extremely rare chance fell upon Extit, a chance to have Northland united once more and completely eliminate the threat from Broken Dragon Fortress. Thales stared blankly at the sword in Lampard's hand. Nuvin was already prepared to have his army march south. He contacted almost every archduke, and as a response, Harold was sent to attend the meeting of all suzerains in Dragon Cloud City as the heir of Black Sand region. Lampard sucked in a lungful of cold air slowly and continued. And then, an accident happened. A thought came to Thales. An attendant in Harold's team suddenly attacked and assassinated Nuvin's eldest son. Lampard's boorish voice was low and filled with imposing might, as if it contained a hidden power. He said with a cold snort, that self-righteous, brutal, bloodthirsty Prince Soria, who was practically built from the same mold as his father, died just like that in Harold's team. In that instant, Thales' heart jumped. The second prince digested Lampard's story without moving. His hand was held tightly by Little Rascal, and her grip was getting tighter. He had heard this story before, just last night. News traveled to Black Sand region, Harold's follower assassinated the prince. Lampard pushed down on his sword hilt and his face turned chilly. Nuvin would not let us go just like that. Because of that, father had even become prepared to wage war against Dragon Cloud City. But unexpectedly, Harold, who was originally supposed to be responsible for this, did not suffer even the slightest condemnation. He was not imprisoned or detained. Nuvin comforted him with gentle words and personally absolved him from guilt. In fact, he continued to let him join the meeting and even courteously sent him back to Black Sand region. Lampard smiled coldly. Even if Nuven lost his most important eldest son, Harold did not cause any trouble to him. Father already sensed there was something off at the time. Lampard stared at his sword, and his gaze started to become even more unfocused. It was as if he was looking at something else. I still remember Harold reporting Nuven's opinions on the day he returned and tried to persuade Father to support Dragoncloud City. In fact, he wanted Father to receive the king's officials to be stationed in Black Sand region to prepare for war. Father got into an intense argument with him. I was forced in between them so that they would not draw their swords at each other's throats, the Archduke said slowly. It was also during that day when Father suddenly realized that Harold Lampard, the eldest son and heir whom he had placed his hopes on, had become Dragoncloud City and the common elected king's strongest supporter and subject, just like his youngest brother Caslin 30 years ago. Thales furrowed his brow deeply. Just like Beacon Illumination City. Pofret's despair-filled face surfaced before his eyes. Lampard turned towards him expressionlessly. Thales' heart tightened. He verified Thales' words faintly. Just like Beacon Illumination City. Father could not accept this. He thought that if this continued, then when Harold inherited Black Sand region, it would only be a matter of time before we became the king's affiliates. Lampard's facial expression was cold and aggressive. Even the position as the Archduke of Black Sand would soon become a vassal where Dragoncloud City can decide his fate with just one word. Sincere talks, threats, scoldings, lessons, he even asked me to counsel him in a roundabout manner. Father used every single method to try and change Harold's mind, but it was useless. Little Rascal's pale face shrank further behind Thales. The terrifying Archduke of Black Sand lowered his head. His expression was somewhat dreary. In the end, Father made his decision to rescind Harold's right of inheritance. Things became chaotic from that point on. Lampard shook his head slowly. When Father mildly brought this up in front of the vassals, he was immediately met with strong objection and advice for him to change his mind. And when Father insisted on stripping off Harold's right of inheritance, the harvest reduced, troubles in finances appeared, and the merchant paths were blocked off. The difficulties in Black Sand region also strangely increased in number. At that moment, the matters that once occurred in Beacon Illumination City happened to Black Sand region. Lampard snorted coldly, and there was great scorn in his voice. Only when all of Black Sand region was rife with burdens did Father realize that during the past 30 years, Dragoncloud City had not only infiltrated the blood of the Lampard family, but Nuven had also brought Harold to his side. Harold refused to yield, and Father refused to compromise. The situation in the territory was getting worse. The forces of power supporting Harold had already surpassed what Father could control. He was driven deeper into despair and became increasingly haggard. Lampard's voice became lower, and the emotions in his words turned his face paler. Black Sand region was just not Dragoncloud City's opponent. Eventually, on the day the king's messenger was about to come to the city again, my mentally and physically exhausted father summoned me to his room. Thales felt a chill crawl up his back. He could not help but remember Chapman Lampard's famous, or perhaps infamous, deed that gave him a terrible reputation that spread far and wide. Lampard raised his head and stared at Dragoncloud City's streets beyond the windows. I still remember how my father's eyes were filled with resolution and dreariness. Thales could not help but tighten his grip over Little Rascal behind him. He spoke to me for a long, long time. The Archduke of Black Sand's eyes grew colder, and his voice became calmer. I hugged his legs and cried, using all the words I could think of to plead with him. I even pulled up my sleeve and let him see the scar left behind on my arm when I went hunting at 14 years old. It was left on me when Harold yanked me out of a snow leopard's mouth. The Archduke's words grew more indifferent. However, Thales' heart clenched tighter. He heard Archduke Lampard continue to talk as if this had nothing to do with him. My father told me this, my son, we are Lampards. The blood of the revolutionary king flows in us. Our family motto is to never yield, be it to those beyond or within our territory, be it the emperor or the king. The Archduke sighed. The darkness in his eyes was incredibly profound, and his words were resolute and firm. We will never yield. Thales listened to Lampard, dumbfounded. Little Rascal widened her eyes. Lampard snorted lightly. He lowered his head and stared at the weapon in his hand. In the end, he gave me this sword. The sword's sheath was so worn down that it was completely bare, and the hilt was so eroded that it was like an ancient weapon. It was as if it was his most precious treasure. A week later, I challenged Harold to a public duel, and Father approved it. Thales held his breath, not even daring to breathe loudly. Mother knelt before the study and cried the whole night, while Father sat in the study and the light burned. Lampard twirled his sword slowly and touched the emblem of the iron fist on the sword hilt. When Mother fainted, she was taken away by the servants. It was silent for a moment in the carriage. Only the sound of the wheels rubbing against the ground as the carriage moved forward was heard for a time. So this is, Thales spoke with much difficulty, but he was interrupted by Lampard. On the day of the duel, Harold had at least 3 chances to end my life, end his younger brother's life, the Archduke said in a deep voice, but it sounded slightly hollow and trembled a little. At least 3 times. Lampard stopped moving his hand across the sword hilt. His voice became airy, as if he spoke from a place far away. In the end, when I pierced his heart, I saw his face clearly, the Archduke said faintly. He was smiling. Lampard sucked in a deep breath. It was difficult to discern his expression with his head lowered. He was smiling in the exact same manner as when he dragged me out of that snow leopard's mouth that day. Thales sighed. This is just. Harold pulled my collar and said his final words beside my ear. Lampard hummed softly, as if he was talking about a story that happened to some other family while he drank tea after a meal. Remember this, Chapman, we will never yield. Lampard chuckled softly, his emotions were indecipherable. Thales raised his head and stared blankly at Lampard's sword, the sword which belonged to the Archduke of Black Sand, the sword he used to kill his older brother. Lampard's voice traveled slowly into his ears. On the second day, Mother jumped off from the tallest observation tower in the castle. Thales and Little Rascal did not move. A quiet sadness filled the carriage. The Lampard family's story caused Thales to have mixed feelings. Lampard sucked in a deep breath. On the third day, with the king's power, Nuven ordered me to go to Eternal Star City and declare war on Constellation. The carriage ran over a hole, the coach jolted slightly. A month later, when the kingdom's wrath brought the remaining brave warriors and broke through the encirclement to reach my father in Raymond Pass, father did not avoid it, did not raise his sword. He simply allowed Merc to break his neck. Lampard laughed lowly. I only realized later that my father was perhaps looking for death. Maybe he could reunite with Mother and Harold in Hell's River. Lampard stopped speaking. Thales exhaled slowly. Thales raised his eyebrows and asked with great difficulty, so you did all this out of hate? You want Nuven to pay, or perhaps you want Dragon Cloud City to be destroyed? Lampard snorted, as if he was laughing with contempt. He slowly leaned back, exposing his face once again under the sunlight. Hate, that laughable thing. Don't compare me to a weakling like Pafret. Thales frowned. Then why did you tell me this story? The prince asked in surprise and bewilderment. Don't tell me that you're just in the mood to talk about your feelings to a person who is about to die. The Archduke of Black Sand's gaze slowly turned dark. Lampard stared at him from the viewpoint of someone superior and slowly shook his head. His voice was low and freezing cold. His words were chilling and aggressive. You are indeed special, boy, but your point of view is forever on the level of mediocre people. Lampard breathed out slowly and said firmly, as for what I truly want, it's a little more than trying to protect myself, take revenge, cause a king's death, and bring destruction to a region. Thales scrutinized Lampard's face. In his mind, he swiftly began to try and figure out his thoughts. Of course, Lampard snorted lightly. You were born into the Jadestar royal family, in the era after the virtuous king. You won't understand this sort of sadness. When the Archduke talked up to that point, Lampard put his sword back into its sheath and went quiet. Thales was slightly taken aback. The virtuous king. This was not the first time he heard of this name from a Northlander. The last time he heard it, it was from King Nuven's mouth. At that time, Thales did not understand what he meant. But this time, Thales remembered. He instinctively touched his chest. The virtuous king, Mindy's Jadestar III, one of the three kings of Constellation. A king does not gain respect by virtue of his bloodline. The bloodline's glory rests on the deeds of the king. Why did King Nuven and Archduke Lampard mention this supreme king of Constellation from over 100 years ago? What did he do, and just what did Lampard want to do? Thales lowered his head deeply. I don't understand. Thales panted rapidly, trying his best to straighten this whirling mess. I thought that you were just trying to protect yourself with everything that you did last night. It was a desperate counter which you were forced to make, a move you made to deliver a counterattack after swearing upon death if you failed. If Black Sand region did not do this, then Dragon Cloud City would. Lampard turned his gaze to Thales and stared at him with a thought-provoking expression. Thales bit his bottom lip. The second prince lifted his head and spoke swiftly, drawing an outside force like Shiles to your side, mobilizing such a large army to the city, having them replace the soldiers in the city right under the secret room's nose, and even hiring an assassin to murder the king. Your plan is not careful and thorough at all. If it was not because of the coincidence of the calamities invading the city, causing the king to be far away from the protection of the White Blade Guards, you would have absolutely not succeeded. At that moment, Lampard snorted coldly and Thales' words off. Coincidence. The Archduke of Black Sand's gaze became sharp again. Indeed, when this is any other usual time, this plan of mine, filled with loopholes, would have absolutely no chance of success, Lampard said with a steady voice. The common elected king, protected tightly by the White Blade Guards, sitting in heroic Spirit Palace, the tallest building in the city, governing the impenetrable Dragon Cloud City, controlling the largest and strongest soldiers, enjoying the richest and most excellent military replenishments and weaponry, and also being in control of spies like the Secret Room. Even if these 2,000 soldiers of mine are supreme-class warriors, it's impossible for me to kill him under those conditions. Thales was taken aback. So. You're right, without the accident wrought by the calamity and the chaos they brought to Dragon Cloud City, causing the city gates and portcullis to suffer from oversight, the king to issue a ban for people to move out of the city, the White Blade Guards to make a mistake, Heroic City Palace to be emptied, and Shield District to be cordoned off, then with just the cooperation between me, Shiles, Vlad, and my other allies, it would have been impossible for me to accomplish this task, Lampard said faintly. Thales' gaze had frozen. He understood the other meaning hiding behind Lampard's words. Thales' expression slowly changed. You, what do you mean? The second prince used his most cautious and lightest voice to ask slowly and with great effort. No, impossible. Lampard's smile was faint yet cold. They didn't tell you anything, did they? The Archduke of Black Sand spoke as if he was laughing at an ignorant child. It doesn't matter whether it is the arrival of the calamities or the assassination. Disaster, assassination, little rascal instinctively felt that the atmosphere before her was a little off. Them. As expected, in the next moment, with an unbelievable guess in his head, Thales leaned his body forward swiftly and immediately raised his voice. With a voice that was almost a roar, he questioned Lampard. Who is, them? What does this have to do with the calamities? Who is working with you, with Black Sand region? Lampard shook his head slowly. His eyes were filled with a cold derision. Take a guess. The Archduke of Black Sand's voice was very calm, as if this was an incredibly relaxing chat. Just what kind of ally and force of power can allow me to cover the eyes of the people around him, get me through the most important parts of the plan, set up a plan for me, and even help me create a nigh impossible coincidence, like calamities appearing so that he can support me in completing this grand act? Just what kind of being can stir up such a storm in Dragon Cloud City? Thales was completely stunned. He did not dare think of the answer, which already dwelled in his heart. No, no way. At that moment, the carriage stopped. Thales snapped out of his daze and shot a glance out of the carriage. This isn't Heroic Spirit Palace. The second prince was momentarily stunned. What do you want to do? Lampard exhaled slowly. One of my co-partners wants you to live. Thales' eyes widened. The Archduke of Black Sand opened the door and said coldly, why don't we try and see just how much you will sell for? Ellipsis. Constellation, Eternal Star City, unnamed underground location. The fire from the torch gradually extinguished. The first rays of sunlight seeped freely through the iron-barred window which was smaller than a palm. It formed the shape of a hashtag on the ground. At that moment, a forthright voice came out of the tightly locked prison. The sun has risen. The robust figure sitting on the chair outside the prison cell slowly raised his head. Yes, the crowned, robust figure said faintly, the sun has risen. I guess you aren't the sort of person who will just sit across the prison cell of the kingdom's traitor overnight with the door between them. The Duke of the Northern Territory in the prison cell asked through the slot in the door in a mocking tone. What happened? The figure on the chair let out a deep and imposing voice. You can tell. Every single time you have something troubling your mind, you will sit down alone and daydream. Valorun snorted lightly. I remember the time when you caused a ruckus in Red Street Market and was punished to go and act as an intern in the Western City Police Station. On the first day you reported for duty, you returned with bruises all over your face, and you acted this way. The robust figure shuddered lightly. During that moment, there was a hint of spirit and laughter in his voice. You know that Gines has great strength. His reply was the Duke of Northern Territory's contemptuous snort. Silence. A moment later, the robust figure rubbed the Jadestar emblem on his hand and asked faintly. Val, do you miss them? The prisoner's stunned expression was apparent through the slot. Who? The Duke asked in low spirits. The robust figure revealed a pair of fatigued blue eyes. In them was an unknown emotion. Family, he said calmly. His voice was still as low as ever. Those people whom we treated as common presences in our everyday lives, and whom we would only think about after we have lost them. The person in the cell did not say anything. The robust figure continued speaking. Such as the old Duke, your brothers, Rohan, Cole, and Nollerner, your older sister, your wife, your eldest and second sons. Thud. A violent thud came from behind the prison cell. Enough. The Duke panted raggedly. With anger that he had forced down for a long time, he spat out his words. What is the point of saying all of this right now? Several seconds of silence. No, it is significant. The robust figure slowly stood up. It's about time, he said faintly. The prisoner behind the prison cell did not answer. I came here to tell you about the culprit who caused the Northern Territory to have rivers of blood flow within it 12 years ago, the king of Extit who amassed his army and invaded the south, said the visitor beyond the prison cell slowly. The Duke of the Northern Territory behind the prison door was momentarily stunned. His face appeared behind the slot once more. His breathing quickened. Over there, he saw the Supreme King of Constellation, Kessel V, with his straight and robust figure and using the coldest and most terrifying voice, speak outside the prison cell. The man who held a massacre that lasted 3 days in Broken Dragon Fortress once he conquered it, and who had his soldiers march into the Northern Territory once spring arrived. The sinner who hung your father on the city gate, who sliced your brothers into minced meat, who made your older sister and wife go missing, who caused the deaths of your 2 sons, and who paralyzed your youngest daughter's hand. The tyrant who burned your family's territory in the Northern Territory, snatched it, ravaged it, and pillaged it, the tyrant whose crimes are too numerous to count. The hateful enemy who escalated the disaster in Constellation to become even worse. The Duke of the Northern Territories' hands gripped the edges of the slot tightly. Thud. His knuckles were pale, and his fingertips shuddered slightly. Neuven Walton VII. Kessel V spoke in a cold voice that allowed no dispute. The so-called born king has paid for his tyranny tonight. There was a deathly silence. Only when it felt as if a century had passed did the Duke's heavy breathing calm down. What did you say? There was a tremor in the Duke's voice. What did you do? Val raised his head, and with his most disbelieving gaze, he cast his eyes on his former close friend and current king. Kell, how did you do it? What exactly did you do? Kessel did not answer. He only stared at the Duke coldly and said slowly, last night, the dragon's blood flowed in the Northland. Extit's chaos will start now. The great dragon's kingdom will fall into decline. There was a terrifying chill in the king's voice. With a blood-red light, Constellation, which has been in darkness for too long, will rise once more. Our glory will be dazzling, and we will be even greater than in the past. When Kessel finished speaking, he turned around without hesitation and left the cubicle. The Duke of the Northern Territories' hysterical questions traveled from behind him. Kell. Valorun began shaking the door madly. His voice echoed in the prison. Damn you, you bastard, tell me, just what the hell did you do, Kessel Jadastar? But the King of Constellation only continued moving alone in the narrow corridor and did not pay any attention to the prisoner's words. He only continued moving forward. In the dark light and the rotting air, he walked further and further away. The Supreme King of Constellation pushed open an iron door, stone-faced. Over there was an old figure with a cane in hand and a black cloak. He bowed slightly to the king. Did everything go smoothly? The king asked coldly. The chief of intelligence of the kingdom's intelligence department, the Black Prophet Morat, smiled faintly. He raised his body and his words were relaxed and indifferent. Of course, Your Majesty, we only had a slight accident. Chapter 198 Price. Lampard descended the carriage alone, then the carriage door was closed tightly once more. It was obvious that he did not intend to allow Thales to go down with him together. Still immersed in the information disclosed by Lampard, Thales tried to right himself in his astonishment and confusion. Under Little Rascal's concerned gaze, he stuck his face to the coach's glass. Lampard said someone wanted me alive. Who is it? Who wishes to keep me alive? Is it really who I think it is? Thales' thoughts were interrupted by the scene before him. They were in a small alleyway that had been emptied into a slightly larger clearing by the Black Sand region soldiers clad in patrol uniforms. Archduke Lampard resumed his solemn and stern expression. He walked to the middle of the alleyway with steady footsteps, holding his sword. There, a fair-skinned man wearing a thick, cotton-padded jacket with a relaxed face awaited the Archduke's arrival. Thales twitched an eyebrow. I don't recognize this man, he's almost no different from a regular Northlander. The man smiled as he raised his hand to his chest, bowed in salutation to Lampard, and moved his lips slightly. Lampard nodded slightly and said something. Who is that? Little Rascal's head came to Thales' side. Don't know. Thales frowned. Both Lampard and the man did not speak very loudly, he could not hear from the coach at all. But this was related to his survival, Thales told himself, I must hear this. I must. Hence, Thales clenched his fists, gently closed his eyes and repeatedly recalled the unique sensation he always felt when he was caught in a life-and-death situation. According to Black Sword, he had to recall this feeling with the implication to himself that there was another person residing in his body. This is for survival, help me. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Finally, the familiar fluctuations emerged again. As if it was alive, Sin of Hell's river surged into his head as Thales tried hard to concentrate it around his ears. In that instant, he first felt as though some parts of his body were heavy, and the other parts light. But a sound that would usually not be heard drifted into his ears. Initially, Thales heard the unsteady heartbeats belonging to Little Rascal and himself, followed by the sound of Little Rascal rubbing her hands restlessly. But then, Thales quickly mastered the trick and turned his ear around to push it against the coach. Within all the noise in the alleyway, he could barely hear the voices of the two men conversing. Yes, he is satisfied and pleased with the cooperation between us. An unfamiliar man's voice traveled into the air slowly. The owner of the voice seemed confident and calm. It looks like things are progressing smoothly. But the person who answered did not seem to have much patience to chat with him. Let's get into the main topic. The melancholic and rough voice of Archduke Lampard drifted over. The boy is in the carriage. Thales felt a shiver run through his body. He opened his eyes, raised a hand and gestured at Little Rascal to keep quiet, who was poking him out of curiosity. The boy, the stranger's tone rose abruptly, as if he just found a long-lost treasure. Thales raised his head and looked out the carriage window. There, the man in the thick jacket turned his head and cast a glance towards the carriage. This glance seemed to penetrate the glass and made Thales shudder in fear. They were eyes filled with greed and desire, just like a viper before it hunts. The stranger's eyes lit up and turned back at Lampard. Thales Jadastar, is that him? Lampard kept quiet and continued to watch him coldly. That fast? The man squinted, then got his answer 2 seconds later. He clasped his hands together and raised the corner of his mouth. The previously neutral and courteous smile immediately turned affable. The last gatehouse and heroic spirit's palace are certainly still in the hands of Dragon Cloud City. Don't tell me that you just snuck in and kidnapped him here. A thought appeared in Thales' mind. Heroic spirit's palace is still in the hands of the Walton family. Lampard snorted through his nose. I have my ways. The Archduke of Black Sand Region's emotions remained in its original state as he did not care at all about showing the man in front of him a pleasant face. What say you? With eyes bright and full of expression, the man stared at Archduke Lampard. It was like a small merchant looking at his biggest customer. Of course it's great. The man clapped once and laughed out loud. We are extremely grateful for your help, Your Excellency. You shall receive our eternal friendship. His words were rudely interrupted by Lampard. Enough with the nonsense. Chapman Lampard, donned in martial attire, snorted coldly. With a cold look, he gazed at the man before him. What do you plan to exchange him with? The strange man froze for a moment. He seemed to not quite understand. Exchange. The man lightly clasped his hands, his expression shifted slightly as if he was slowly thinking this word over. Immediately afterwards, he laughed without restraint. Please forgive my long-windedness, but since the start, our assistance to you has already. Assistance. Lampard started again without showing the man any respect, making the man's words die in his throat. The Archduke of Black Sand Region snorted in disdain. You did not do anything apart from contact a reliable killer. Lampard lifted his chin slightly, his eyes piercing. You want the boy, then you had better exchange him with a price. The eavesdropping Thales shivered slightly. Contact a reliable killer. A reliable killer. The man quickly answered Thales' question. He frowned slightly, wearing a resigned smile that seemed to say, how can this be? He tried to reason with Lampard. We're talking about the assassin's flower, and I promise you that you will not find assassins more outstanding than them in this world, especially since you were aiming for the most difficult target. Lampard did not say a word. And excuse my bluntness, but due to the lapse in your intelligence, the migratory locust wasted too much time searching for the target in Heroic Spirit's palace. The man sighed and shook his head. If it weren't for our men who discovered the target's whereabouts in time, the migratory locust wouldn't have been able to complete the task at all. It wouldn't have been possible for you. The man's words came to a stop. He frowned when he saw Lampard slowly shake his head. As far as I know, Banet Charlton is not one of your members. He lives by his own blade, so I will discuss the remunerations with him personally. Lampard's voice was not loud, but it came with a hint of unquestionability. As for all of you, stop using other people's chips to bargain with. If you still want to take that boy away, that prince. As Thales heard those 2 sentences about him in the coach, he suddenly figured out a critical point in his head. Banet Charlton, he descended at high speed from Cliff of the Sky and assassinated King Nuvan in Shield District. But according to the man's statement. In other words, the reason Lampard would appear before me with an army. The man did not speak again. He just looked at Lampard silently as his eyes revealed a complex look. Lampard continued to return his gaze expressionlessly. In the end, the man was defeated by Lampard's eyes. He sighed, you're so greedy. We're not having a casual conversation here. Lampard shook his head and coldly threw these words behind as he turned around to leave. The man's face changed. Such a stingy and petty archduke, he thought impatiently in his heart. All right, Your Excellency. He stopped Lampard, somewhat frustrated. The strange man shrugged, as if he was resigned. A strange light came to his eyes. As long as you are willing to give us the boy. The man exhaled slowly as his expression recovered its previous strange smile. We have a wide range of resources and manpower from the Anlenzo Dukedom to the Valier Gang, and from Crystal Jade City to the 3 Demon Islands. It is the same even in Extit, the man said with a chuckle. I bet the newborn Extit will need us for many things. After all, not everyone will serve a fierce suzerain suspected of regicide. We can help you with pacifying domestic affairs. If there are any idiotic vassals that you find are difficult for you to get rid of. Resources, manpower, not easy to deal with. Thales' heart clenched in terror. In that instant, he suddenly knew the identity of the man before his eyes. Lampard's reply was only 2 cold words, not enough. The man was slightly stunned. He frowned as he seemed to be pondering carefully. After a good while, he relaxed his furrowed brow and said with a rare cautiousness, if this doesn't satisfy you. We still hold plenty of intel. Whether it is a political scandal or state secret, with just some manipulation or even adjustments, it is enough to set off a huge ruckus in a few small countries. The man's tone was no longer as relaxed as before. In Thales' ears, the rate of his speech grew faster. As far as I know, Extit has always been quite concerned about the West and the situation of the frontlines at Golden Passage. We can also make the Alliance of Freedom sink into civil unrest, unable to extricate themselves from it for several years. We can even get White Mountain into trouble, if your wildest ambitions are more than. Thales clenched his fists tightly and gulped a mouthful of spittle. This is not right, this sounds like. Not enough. Beyond Thales' expectations, Lampard's reply remained the same two cold words. This time, the man's expression finally stiffened. He scrutinized Archduke Lampard for a good few seconds. The man closed his eyes and exhaled a hot breath through his nose. When he opened his eyes again, there was a harsh, cold intention in addition to the cold, grim look in his eyes. Then what do you actually want? There was already a hint of impatience in the man's words. His previously relaxed and pleasant tone began to fade steadily. Power. We can serve as your spies and henchmen. We can be your blades, swords, shields, horses and serve you so that you can achieve all your wildest ambitions. Wealth. Though our inventory is unlike a country's, we have certain rare treasures that even every country's royal families have rarely seen. Beautiful women. We can. No, I believe you're not someone with such inferior interests. So, Your Excellency, what's the price in your heart? The man took a deep breath. The smile on his face had disappeared without a trace. Say it, we can negotiate on anything. Lampard kept a steady gaze on him. At some unknown point of time, a taunting smile hung from the corner of his mouth. My price. The Archduke of Black Sand region snorted, causing a trace of displeasure to flash in the man's eyes. As the figurehead of an assassination organization who even relies on selling information and secrets for a living, you are willing to pay such a price without the slightest hesitation. All just for that boy. Lampard suddenly took a step forward and gradually approached that stranger. His eyes burned like a ferocious beast that had been secluded for a long time. This only proves one thing. A chill crept into the man's heart as he felt Lampard's extremely oppressive eyes on his person. He involuntarily took a step back. Inside the coach, Thales heard Lampard say one word at a time, this boy's value is much greater than all of that combined. With his supernatural hearing, Thales heard his own breathing begin to accelerate. My value, what is it? And what does it have to do with them? The man's face changed once more. His eyes widened as he watched Lampard slowly grab hold of the sword at his waist. The martial attire on the Archduke's body let out a frictional sound. There's a secret about him that I don't know about, Lampard said in a deep voice. His eyes were fixed on the man's face, whose expression changed constantly. My request is very simple. I want that secret, the reason why all of you schemed and racked your brains to get him. As Lampard's words ended, both men stopped talking and the negotiations returned to silence. Only the indistinct voices of people from outside the alley could be heard in that clearing. The mood of the conversation had turned strange. Both of them remained motionless in their stalemate. It had even made the anxious Thales unable to bear it, and he wanted to get down from the carriage to urge them on. Finally, the strange man slowly uttered these words. In his voice was an indifference and callousness that was unsettling. Your respected Excellency, you haven't even solved your current predicament, conquering Dragon Cloud City and Extit, and you're already thinking about something else. The future is full of promise, as are you. Why bite off more than you can chew? Thales could not help but purse his lips. I've revealed my price. Lampard did not have the slightest inclination to negotiate with the other party. The Archduke of Black Sand region watched the man coldly. Tell me, why is he so important to you all? The man glanced at the carriage, then immediately lowered his eyes. He did not say a word. I'm on a tight schedule, Lampard coldly added, you have 10 seconds to make a decision. The man's eyebrows twitched uncontrollably, his Adam's apple bobbed, he was hesitating. In that moment, even Thales held his breath. The man let out a breath and slowly said, you know he is a prince, princes are naturally precious. Lampard snorted with disdain, don't tell me that you want to bring him to Constellation to exchange him for a ransom. What's wrong with that? The smile that had been long gone from the man's face appeared on his lips, but a gloom spread across his eyes. The Jadastar royal family's wealth is common knowledge. Then I might as well just personally kidnap him in exchange for the ransom. Lampard rebutted swiftly, his voice imposing. Why should I deal with you? The man lightly clenched his teeth. Your Excellency, I thought we came here today, the man responded with an unpleasant expression, but Lampard interrupted his sentence once more without consideration for his feelings. In fact, I've roughly guessed some parts of it already. The Archduke raised his head slightly, the sword in his hand reverberated. At first, you arranged for a spy in my army to assassinate him, and you did so without hesitation. Yet today, you say you want him alive instead. Thales gritted his teeth. That's right, Lampard was talking about the assassination of the Mystic Gun unit at Broken Dragon Fortress. Then, if we make a connection with Pofret's final words. Initially, it was thought that it was fine as long as he was dead. Now, you want to have the prince alive in your custody, Lampard said, your conspiracy is related to Constellation's kingship designation, isn't it? The man narrowed his eyes. If anyone looked at him from the distance, they would find that he resembled a viper whipping its tongue out. However, Lampard's next words caused the man's colors to change abruptly. What you have all done in Constellation 12 years ago, has something to do with this. It was not just the man who had a dramatic change in complexion, there was also Thales in the carriage. The bloody year. He did not imagine that, under such circumstances, he could access this secret which has plagued him for a long time. Lampard had complete control of the rhythm of the conversation. He leaned his head over, his eyes seemed to contain the entire winter's ice and snow. And the reason you were fickle-minded on whether to put him to death is because a certain important person in your organization came and completely overturned the expectations of all you little lackeys, correct? The man's complexion grew more and more unpleasant. Lampard plainly said, "It's him, isn't it?" Thales raised his head slightly as questions surfaced from his heart. Him. The man gaped. He took a deep breath first before he raised his eyes. "We do not wish to trouble you with this." The man's expression was filled with aloofness and a refusal to answer. "We'll make this clear. We need that boy." "Of course." Lampard lifted his left hand slightly in the carriage's direction and gently said, "With the premise that you tell me, in its entirety, why exactly you want this boy." The man stared at Lampard silently, trying to read his emotions and thoughts from his weary face. "Yes, that's correct," the strange man said very slowly. "Gaining control of this boy means we gain control of the throne of Constellation, right? When that time comes, you too can receive great help." Lampard did not allow him to continue. "I'm fed up with your nonsense, errand runner." The Archduke of Black Sand's words were placid and rather uninterested. "What about that important person of yours? Where's the person in charge?" The man's face changed again. Lampard watched him expressionlessly. "Your Excellency, you are an ally we highly value and cherish." He heaved a long sigh as he seemingly made a resolve about something. "For the sake of having more collaborations in the future that involve more depth and hold greater importance, why don't we show some sincerity and goodwill, and leave some leeway for each other?" The man silently said. As he watched the man's expressions, Lampard took in a deep breath. "The principle of a collaboration is fairness." The Archduke's face remained unchanged and he plainly said, "Having done nothing, you wish to take away such an important bargaining chip from me." The man's eyes widened slightly, his eyes reflected with a different sort of chilling intent. "Having done nothing?" The stranger sneered a little. "Trust me, Your Excellency, if we reach a point where we really want to do something, you would not want to see that day." A strange light flashed across Lampard's eyes. What is the meaning of this?" The Archduke of Black Sand spoke slowly and gently, one word at a time, and in a low voice, as if he was afraid of waking the people sleeping soundly in the early morning. Thales subconsciously felt that something was amiss. However, that man seemed as though he was unaware of the Archduke's expression and tone. Thales saw him raise the corner of his mouth slightly. "I mean, no matter how confident a person is, it's best that they think twice if they wish to defy us." The strange man raised a hand and straightened his robe. His words contained a deep, steely chill. "Let's look at Constellations 82nd. The man snorted. "And that dreaded eldest prince, see where they are now." Thales' eyebrows slowly drew together. Lampard stared at him, not moving an inch. There was not a single fluctuation in his expression. The only sign of his emotions were the indescribable flashes of light dancing in his eyes. The man lowered both hands, raised his head, and looked directly at Archduke Lampard. His tone held a strange emotion. "Are their examples not enough to attract your attention?" Lampard did not reply the man, he used the most straightforward action to respond. Right before his eyes, Thales saw Lampard lift his right arm abruptly and seize the stranger's neck. Chapter 199. As long as the shadow shield does not die, they will eternally follow the form. Bang! Before the man could put on a shocked face, he was lifted into the air by the tall and strong Lampard. Thales and Little Rascal, who watched the scene outside the window, were stunned. "Why did he?" Little Rascal cowered in fear. Thales cut Little Rascal off, calmly observing the situation. "Be quiet, keep watching." The stranger suddenly found himself in a dangerous situation and reacted quickly, extending both of his hands. In one hand he held a dagger, and in the other a long spike. He thrust both weapons at Lampard, but before he can fully extend his arms, someone forcefully clamped his arms together from behind. One of Extit's 5 war generals, Black Sand Regions, Fire Knight, Lord Tolja, whom Thales had met a few times and who escorted him to Dragon Cloud City, appeared behind the stranger. Stone-faced, he held the man's struggling arms. Lampard continued to impassively grab the stranger by the neck. Unable to breathe properly, the man's eyes widened. He wanted to say something, but failed to in the end. The next moment, Tolja twisted the man's arms. Snap! The sound of dislocated bone echoed. The man trembled violently, he closed his eyes and moaned in pain. Tolja let go and the man's arms hung down limp behind his back. His dagger and long spike dropped to the ground simultaneously. Cling clang. "I gave you a chance," Lampard said coldly. "What?" Drenched in cold sweat, the man spoke with difficulty. Lampard continued, "Have you heard of this saying, if you take others to be a fool, better be prepared for them to take you as a fool, too?" The man grunted with all his might. Lampard loosened his grip slightly. Finally able to breathe properly, the man gritted his teeth and said with a hideous expression, "Traitor. We organized so many things for you from the beginning to the end, yet you..." Before he could finish talking, Lampard tightened his grip on the man's neck again. I've had enough. The Archduke of Black Sand's expression was still ice cold, but his glare was murderous. It's true that the Charlton family made the attack, Camus Union pulled the strings, and that the gangs put forth their strength. However, Black Sand region was the one who risked everything. My forces took control of the situation. We rely on the people from the south to deliver and protect the most confidential information, including the most important intel about the calamities. Apart from moving your mouth, you bastards did nothing. Calamities. People from the south. When he heard these keywords, Thales inhaled absent-mindedly. Outside the carriage, everything carried on. Lampard still held the stranger's neck, and Lord Tolja stood behind the stranger, watching everything with a cold gaze. All of you were willing to sacrifice nothing, fanning the flames of trouble instead. However, all of you want to reap what you did not sow. Lampard's tone was bone-chillingly murderous. And you have the audacity to threaten me. The Archduke raised his gaze a little and his tone suddenly increased in pitch. Where do you all get your confidence? Those arrows of yours that lurk within the sewers. Vermin that cannot see the light of day. Lowlifes that feed on trash to survive. The man struggled with all his might, unable to say anything. Inside the carriage, Thales panted and ignored his chaotic thoughts. He raised his head and continued to look out of the window. Lampard's expression started to change. He gritted his teeth and wrinkled his brow. Do you all think that you are very clever? Happily relying on having your information handed to all sides and sinister conspiracies to play tricks on powerful nobles, arrogantly making fools out of long-standing regimes of kingdoms, and smugly taking pleasure in controlling things from behind the scenes. However, all of you are neither the kingdom's secret intelligence department, nor the secret room. You're not backed by some powerful kingdom. Gaze filled with hatred, Lampard raised the man even higher. All of you are just a nest of rats that have been scampering from one hole to another for a few hundred years. Even the calamities are better than all of you. Did you take me for an idiot like Pofret? Did you think you could manipulate me as you liked? The Archduke of Black Sand region's words went from insincere and cold, to furious and interrogative, but he was strangely still able to maintain a calm and distant tone. Did you think that I am magnanimous enough to let you infiltrate my troops and place spies in my territory? Lampard narrowed his eyes a little. Was it fun to control my mystic gun unit and to have my military officer at your fingertips? Eyes wide, the man's gaze was both bewildered and frightened. His arms hung limply beside him. The Black Sand Archduke continued uttering horrifyingly cruel words in a terrifyingly calm tone. Did you think that I didn't want to destroy and tear all of you to shreds every single time I had to go to you, contact you, and negotiate with you? Tolja seemed to sense that Thales was watching him. He turned his head around abruptly and looked at the prince. Unable to withstand his gaze, little rascal cowered in her seat. Thales was a little shocked, but he gritted his teeth and continued observing the situation outside the carriage under the Fire Knight's extremely oppressive stare. And don't think that I don't know about how all of you are still infiltrating my forces even though all of you deny so. The Archduke said coldly, you rotten bastards who only know how to hide in the sewers and eat trash. After being driven to a corner in Constellation, all of you saw Exted as a free paradise. Lampard gritted his teeth, his expression was hideous. Trust me, Northland is scarier than the South. If it were me, I would have dug every single one of you dirty rats out of the darkest holes no matter the cost, price, or sacrifices it would take. The man seemed to have forgotten how to breathe. Even his struggling weakened as he stared at Lampard in a trance. The Archduke continued speaking. Even Thales, who was listening from a distance, felt his blood run cold. I will hang all the nobles who are secretly communicating and conspiring with all of you, and all the vile people who have relations with you. I will tear them to shreds. Wherever I am, I will make sure that every single one of you have nowhere to hide, are unable to flee, and have no way to live. I will suck the air that you all breathe dry, take away all your nutrients and crush your hiding places. I will bury all you sewer rats in Northland to the point where you are completely annihilated. Not a single pest can survive in my soil. Lampard slowly loosened his grip on the stranger's throat. His gaze flashed with an authoritative and murderous spark. Whether you believe it or not, I will find every single one of you, in every nook and cranny, and exterminate you. The Archduke slowly placed his lips together. His gaze was still piercingly cold. With trembling lips, the man shivered and uttered a sentence. The Shadow Master will not let you go. Having heard that, Lampard curled up the corners of his lips a little, flashing a fierce and profound smile. Do you think that I'll let him go? He's in Dragon Cloud City right now, in Spear District, isn't he? The man froze. Thales tried to breathe properly. He mentally remembered everything that just happened. Assassination, Charlton, calamities, people from the south, Pofret, Mystic Gun, and the Shadow Master. Lampard suddenly released the man, and he fell to the ground. He panted continuously. And you, the Archduke kneeled down slowly and flashed a virtually non-existent smile under the man's fearful gaze. Hey, do it then. We are all already prepared for it. The man closed his eyes, as if he had accepted his fate. He had an expression akin to calmly accepting death. As long as the Shadow Shield does not die, they will eternally follow the form. When he heard these bizarre words, Thales sighed softly. His speculations were verified. But the next moment, there was a theatrical twist. Lampard suddenly extended his hand and grabbed the man's dislocated left shoulder. He then pressed down hard. Snap. While the man screamed miserably, Lampard emitted a low and deep laugh. Thales widened his eyes. 1 second, 2 seconds. Drenched in cold sweat, the man's eyes widened. He realized that he was still alive. He froze. Dazed, he breathed and exercised his left shoulder, which was popped back in. He looked shocked. No need to be too anxious, Stake. The Archduke tapped the man's shoulder and said calmly and flatly in a low voice, I was just joking with you. We're after all, partners, aren't we? The man nicknamed Stake widened his eyes in disbelief. He turned his head back and glanced at Lord Tolja. However, the latter remained expressionless. You should look at your face. Lampard chuckled loudly. You laugh at yourself. Stake turned his head abruptly and stared at Lampard in disbelief. You, just now, why? He panted, surprised. Never mind, just report all of this to your master. Lampard tapped Stake's face while he flashed a bone-chilling smile. This way, he'll know what I feel about all of you. The man stared at Lampard, dumbfounded, as if he did not know the suzerain anymore. Be good and pop your right shoulder back in yourself. Archduke Lampard stood and stared at him from above. I'll take the boy with me, and wait until your master comes round. The man did not move at all. He seemed to be stupefied. Lampard turned and said steadily, also, don't hold a grudge against me. You know, if a joke is repeated too many times. Lampard turned his head back and lowered it slightly. His gaze was strange. One of these days, it will be for real. The man gritted his teeth and lowered his head. The next moment, Lampard left without even a backward glance. Tolja followed him without a word, leaving behind the man who was panting slightly. It was as though the threatening conversation just now had never happened. Still in shock, Thales watched as Lampard and Tolja walked towards the carriage. The Archduke's conversation with his subordinate echoed next to Thales' ears again. With the help of the people there, we successfully took down the last city portcullis in front of Heroic Spirit Palace. The Fire Knight's voice was prudent and austere. We have already isolated Heroic Spirit Palace. Lampard nodded slightly. The rumors we spread were very effective. Garrison officers and people from the main disciplinary hall are already starting to send their units into Shield District. President Lisbon also began his efforts to stop the news from spreading. Before we are exposed, this will be a great help to us, Tolja said flatly. According to your plan, we have 3 more hours. Wonderful. The Archduke acknowledged Tolja's words without changing his expression. But your countenance is not quite right. Is there anything else I should know? There was a small mishap. Lord Tolja nodded softly. His voice deepened. We captured Gleeward, but Nicholas managed to escape. Lampard furrowed his eyebrows. When he heard this news, Thales froze. The Star Killer, Nicholas. He's still alive. Walking, the Archduke asked in a deep voice, I thought that you had the Rising Sun sword with you. Yes, but someone broke into the battlefield unexpectedly. Tolja's tone did not change. He did not seem to be troubled over the failure of his mission. Even though we tried our best to encircle and kill him, and we even left him many parting gifts, the intruder still managed to break out of the encirclement with Nicholas in tow. Lampard did not inquire any further, having worked together with Tolja for years. He simply uttered one word. Who? Tolja's reply gave Thales pause again. A plain-looking man with superb skills, the Fire Knight said softly. He had a strange black sword. Thales' gaze was stuck on the carriage door. The sin of Hell's River left Thales' body like receding waves, taking away his superhuman hearing. It also made him tired. The next moment, Lampard opened the carriage door and boarded the carriage under Little Rascal's terrified gaze. Thales massaged his sore head to alleviate the aftereffects of the sin of Hell's River and organized his mind, which was becoming messier after overhearing the conversation between the two men. He exhaled and, to the cold-faced Lampard, he said in a low voice. I thought you wanted to sell me to him. Lampard turned his head and stared at Thales. You are more valuable than I imagined, the Archduke said calmly. The buyer needed to go back and negotiate the offer. Thales sneered mockingly. Those who lured in the calamities on your behalf, the second prince asked deliberately, do they know what you plan to do with me? Probed by Thales, Lampard snorted softly. He turned his head away and did not reply. All right, Thales sighed as he watched the tight-lipped Lampard. Neuven is dead, but what do you plan to do next? Having heard this, Lampard narrowed his eyes. What's next? The Archduke sighed softly. His gaze seemed to burn. I'm going to save this kingdom. Thales froze. The carriage moved again, into the unknown future. Chapter 200 Encounter. The elf stared calmly into Caslin's eyes, and like countless times before this, felt the faintly discernible presence in the air. Based on experience, she would first detect some mixed-up fragments and scenes, similar to overflowing and murky river water, laden with mud and sand. After a fraction of a second, these disorderly fragments would follow a powerful rhythm that depended on the mental state of the person being read. It would then coalesce into a distinguishable, purposeful, and logical consciousness that is obtained through an organization filter. For countless years in the past, this was how she rapidly and accurately read other people's minds. The strength of warriors, the weakness of cowards, the schemes of kings, the menace of nobles, the greed of merchants, and the degeneration of priests. Of course, this time-tested method would also fail on rare occasions. Like now. Ida furrowed her brow a little as she watched Caslin wave his pike. The only thing she could feel was murderous intentions, deep and boundless. Caslin's gaze was indecipherable. He waved his pike, leaving a shimmering trail in the air with its tip. Swoosh. The pike appeared in front of Ida's eyes. The air was still radiating with nothing but killing intent. Ida threw her arms open like a bird. She lowered her knees, bent her body backwards and raised her head in an unbelievable maneuver. The Soul Slayer pike's black tip swung through the air and grazed Ida's chin. The next second, the elf's silver pupils constricted a little. She turned her body gracefully to the side and managed to evade the tip of the pike. Then, her body moved back into her original position, like a longbow snapping back into place after it had been stretched taut. She exuded a sort of rapturous beauty while her bright white hair whipped about in the wind. Even her body, which she moved to bend and stretch to its limits, was filled with the presence of power. She rolled to the side, creating a safe distance between her and her opponent. Caslin drew back his pike and watched her coldly. Ida sighed to herself. Even though the Soul Slayer pike had forced her to the edge of death many times, from the start to the end, Ida could sense nothing but an extremely pure killing intent. He did not have even the slightest bit of thought governing his mind, actions, or attitude. It was completely different from the Caslin she met in the past. Even the stupidest bird, animal, insect, and reptile would have a clear sense of awareness and a clear train of thought, right? The elf focused her gaze on the tip of her opponent's pike and decisively halted the fragments of consciousness that surged into her perception. She knew that there would only be a pure and unsullied killing intent. This was a man who had complete mastery of his own consciousness, devoid of all thoughts and goals during a battle, totally freeing himself, succumbing to his killing instincts. This hampered her ability to use her psionic power. Ida solemnly brandished her machete with a flourish and adjusted the distance between her legs. There is only one type of situation that can mold someone into a warrior like this, Ida thought, watching the impassive Caslin. The battlefield, it was not the quick battles that involved ambushes, assaults, pursuits, and annihilation, but the bloody and tough battles that take thousands of lives and last for days. Vast battlefields, incessant fighting, threats and dangers that lurk everywhere, wave after wave of massacres, and layer after layer of opponents. This tortuous, terrifying hell can mold a normal person into a wild beast whose only cares would be to battle and survive. Driven by a crazed bloodlust, warriors can turn into the most powerful killing machines. Ida had lived for a very long time and had encountered opponents like this before. She closed her eyes gently. It's time. Time to throw away all unnecessary battles and burdens, and engage in a primitive battle. Just like her ancestors. Her older sister's teachings on the training field echoed in her ears once more, as clear as before. Ida, you must remember that as an elf, we love beauty and nature. Under the dazzling white sacred tree, her older sister's tone was unusually solemn, holding the authority of a father. Even though Ida once felt her father's consciousness 100 years before she was born, she had never heard her father's voice with her own ears. Hands behind her back, Ida's older sister said flatly to the trembling Ida, but elves are neither weak nor vulnerable. Even though we are the heretics of the ancient elf kingdom, we are their strongest branch of descendants. Among all the remaining elf bloodlines in this world, we are not only the most belligerent ones, but also the best fighters, we are the sacred elves. Her older sister's expression became solemn. She turned and moved to the side, revealing 3 captives who were tied up. The round-eared humans trembled violently and were extremely anxious. One had his head shaved until there was only a tuft of hair left at the center of his scalp, he looked just like a rooster. Another had a thick layer of oil in his hair, and the third one was bald. They were blabbering at the elves in human language. The rooster looked really ugly. On the other hand, thick oil did not look that ugly. As for Baldy, he looked, God, she almost wanted to puke. Ida, follow tradition. Ida still remembered her older sister's words, the 3 humans' faces as they struggled with all their might, and her older sister's cold smile. Raise your machete, chop off their heads, and complete your coming-of-age ceremony. Ida opened her eyes. The extraordinary memory of elves allowed her to recall every single detail clearly. Combat maneuvers that she was once adept to, but slowly went out of practice due to a reliance on psionic power, returned to her body. The machete held tightly in her hand, she charged towards Caslin. Ellipsis. He felt so thirsty, his throat almost burning. His tongue, just as dry, rubbed against his teeth, causing a strange sensation, like coarse cloth rubbing on wood. He was panting as he lay on the scorching sand. He was hiding behind a large dune to evade fatal threats, the sun, the fiery sand, and the enemies. He could not help but tighten the grip of his right hand on the sword hilt. Passed down from generation to generation in his family, the sword was covered in dust and blood. So tired, so much pain. He flexed his swollen and sore wrist, and felt the burning pain in his shoulder. He gritted his teeth and persevered. Damn it, that gray mixed breed's hammer and chain even had barbs on it. Of course, compared to his Captain Wanda, whose capability was above superclass, he was already very fortunate. Some of the captain's brain matter is probably still on the hilt of that hammer and chain. Pity the captain's lover, still waiting anxiously for him at Wing Fort. I heard that the captain once saved her from the hands of bandits without regard for anything. What a pity. He sighed internally. He then felt the pain again. He loosened his sun-scorched armor a little and pulled open his collar, sticky with sweat and blood. No matter what, I must treat my wounds, he thought. A bottle was flung through the air and landed beside him, making an indentation on the sand. He turned, puzzled. Use this. It's low-quality chaka wine that even hyenas won't drink. I bribed the quartermaster for it. With a bandage over his left eye, a veteran leaned against the sand dune and took out his flint with his unbandaged hand. He skillfully lit the hand-rolled cigarette between his lips. It's not too bad if you only use it to wash your wound. Just don't drink it. Thank you. He turned his body over absent-mindedly. As he panted, he took the bottle and opened it with some effort. The veteran finally lit the thick roll of tobacco between his lips, and threw the flint in his hand away without hesitation. Smoke seeped out of the hand-rolled cigarette. The veteran pulled a deep drag and let out a satisfied moan. He then extended his blood-covered hand and tore off the butt, mixing it with the sand and burying it. To the scouts with visions sharper than hawks, even the smallest wisp of smoke could attract their attention. That phrase isn't used here often. The veteran buried his face in the sand and comfortably exhaled his only puff of smoke. Cohen grit his teeth and stared at the reflection of the sun through the chaka wine in the bottle. He then licked his cracked lips. He held back the urge to drink it and raised his head to ask, "What?" "We don't say, thank you." The veteran turned over and swatted away the elbow next to him that had invaded some of his space. He then turned his head and said to Cohen, "Too cringy." Cohen glanced at the bottle in his hand, then at the hideous wound on his shoulder. He hesitated and sighed. "It will be over soon. Endure it." "All right." He opened his mouth and pulled open the cap with his mouth. He took 3 deep breaths and muttered in a soft voice, "Then, I owe you one." The next moment, he shut his eyes tightly and poured the wine on his wound. The burning pain on his shoulder was like a continuous flame. He trembled and a loud moan escaped him. He felt the bottle cap in his mouth slowly change shape. Finally, the pain ended. Drenched in sweat, he spat out the bottle cap, and with trembling hands, tore up a portion of his clothing. He bandaged his wound the way his captain taught them to. The veteran watched everything from the side and sneered. "Ha, to be able to die together with the son of a powerful noble." The veteran chuckled and said in a mocking tone, "I can't believe that I could be so fortunate." Cohen ignored the veteran. He had to endure being mocked and ridiculed like this from the first day he arrived at Blade Fang's camp in the western deserts, whether they were intentional or not. "I'm used to this." "Is that so?" he said flatly and gave his bandage one last yank. "No wonder you were posted to such a good squad even though you just arrived." The veteran exercised his hand and sighed. "You could have become a commander, or at least a captain after 1 or 2 years." He snorted softly. "What a pity that your luck isn't great, novice." The veteran shook his head. Cohen felt a little annoyed even though he was very grateful for the help the veteran had given just now. "None of us here are fortunate." Deciding to change the topic, he raised his head and looked at the 10 or so soldiers who were resting beneath the sand dune. Most of them were covered in injuries and seemed distressed. "Are these our only survivors?" "Of course not." The veteran expressions was a little unpleasant. "Some were held captive, a fate worse than death. I heard that there is a lack of food among the mixed breed, and a lack of men among the barren breed." Food. Cohen recalled those skulls in the abandoned camps, strung up into a line and stuck into the ground. He felt nauseated, but tried his best to push that feeling away. Lack of men. The tribe of barren breeds is experiencing a serious population shrink, but don't get me wrong, the veteran sneered, they will give you some kind of drug to make sure that you stay hard down there until they're done, or until you're dead. Under the usual circumstances, you would be long dead before they're done. He stared at the veteran's meaningful gaze, and sighed. He stopped thinking about this issue. "Why are you making things so hard for yourself?" The veteran's voice rose again. "Why did you leave your comfortable manor and castle like an idiot to seek death here? God, so annoying." He thought about it agitatedly. But no matter what, the veteran gave him the bottle of wine just now, he could not be rude. His shoulder felt a lot better. His gaze dimmed. "It's true, why did I make things so hard for myself?" At that moment, he suddenly missed his home in Walla Hill. The old castle with plenty of prohibition gates and locks. The spiritless manor. His 2 talkative younger sisters whom he wished he could grab, swing in a circle and throw, and that stoic-faced old man. He flashed a bitter smile. At least, he sighed and rested his head on the scorching sand. "I am free to choose my way of death here." The veteran stared quietly at Cohen. He suddenly chuckled. "You should have stayed in your comfortable manor." The veteran shook his head. "Everything here is too unfair for you, pampered boy." He felt a surge of indignant resentment. He turned and said with a sigh, "Unfair, how about you? Why did you come to the western deserts, to this hell?" The soldier froze momentarily. "Me, ha," the veteran narrowed his eyes, as if he was reminiscing a distant past. His tone was tired and jaded. "For someone who should have died a long time ago, it is only fair for me to risk my life fighting those gray mixed breeds. There's nothing fairer than this." Cohen listened to the veteran's words and said nothing. He only sighed after a long while. "Hey, novice," the veteran stared at the sky and said faintly, "remember this, there's no glory on the battlefield." The veteran exhaled slowly, "Only life and death. Credit is not given to the chess pieces," the veteran muttered with a reminiscing gaze. "It is only given to the chess players." Cohen tightened his grip on his sword. "This is Carabane's glory, or at least, it's past glory. It is past 3 o'clock, but reinforcements have yet to arrive. So, when will the next pursuit be?" He stared at the sky and felt a surge of despair. "Soon," the veteran said nonchalantly, "these gray mixed breeds are not deterred by the heat. We'll all die here." The next moment, a black figure appeared on the horizon. The massive figure wore an ugly armor and held a hammer and chain that looked extremely familiar to Cohen. Hammer and chain, that hammer and chain, the captain's brain matter is still on it. Terror rose in his heart. The one half of the head remaining on Captain Wanda's neck seemed to be smiling at him. The terrifying and massive figure charged rapidly towards them with heavy footsteps. Boom, boom, boom. Each and every step caused several sand particles to rise into the air. It waved its hammer and chain. Cohen unconsciously struggled to get up and felt a wave of dizziness. He felt an intense pain in his right arm. Instinctively, he opened his mouth. "Enemy," he inhaled a mouthful of cold air and shouted incoherently, "Enemy attack." "Orcs," Cohen Carabane roared furiously and sat up in the darkness despite the intense pain. He shouted subconsciously with all his might, "The gray mixed breeds are here." But this time, he was not met with crude yells and unpleasant curses, there was only the icy clanking sound of iron chains, the echo of his own voice. And the intense, never-ending pain in his right arm. Still in shock, the police officer panted. His heart was beating constantly. There was no desert, no scorching sun, no gray mixed breeds, no such battles. Roused with a start from his nightmare, Cohen suddenly noticed that he was breathing in the thick scent of lamp oil instead of the dry air unique to deserts. It was then that he realized that he was not at the dangerous frontline of the western deserts. The police officer shook his head vigorously. He panted and brought his consciousness back to the present. "My God. Wake up, Cohen, watch your right arm." Miranda sounded faint and weak. Cohen endured the intense pain. Drenched in cold sweat, he realized in shock that his upper body was encircled tightly by an iron chain. Even his fingers were bound within. He could not move at all. "Where are we?" Cohen turned his head, and unsurprisingly, he saw Miranda bound up in a similar fashion in the dim prison cell across from him. He cried fearfully, "Where is Caslin?" "I don't know." Cohen could see half of the swordswoman's pale and flustered face. "This place seems to be near Heroic Spirit Palace." "Shut up, citizen of the Empire." Outside the prison cell, a soldier who was dressed like a patrol turned and said coldly to Cohen, "One more word and I'll dislocate your jaw." Miranda met Cohen's eyes and shook her head a little. At least 6 men were guarding his prison cell. The police officer exercised his ankle, which was also tied down. He concluded that he stood no chance. He sighed and laid back down on the floor. At this moment, some distance away, a thick iron door opened. Light shone in through the open door. Cohen raised his head and narrowed his eyes to adjust himself to the light. Another fleet of soldiers entered with 2 tiny figures in tow. Watch them well. The leader was an armored knight with a tall and large build. He coldly commanded the soldiers in the prison cell, "This is one of the Archduke's most important captives." Cohen furrowed his brows. Most important captives. At this moment, a youthful voice came from the prison cell beside Cohen. It's you." The lad whom was suspected to be part of the disaster sword struggled towards the cell door with all his might. Shaken and agonized, he cried out at the 2 equally shocked children. "Prince Thales." Under Cohen's almost stumped gaze, the second prince of Constellation, whom Cohen had met once in the Hall of Stars, was brought into the prison cell with his hands tied behind his back. There was a little girl with him. Flustered and shocked, the prince raised his head.